The nation's long web of interstates provided the perfect hunting ground for a depraved predator. He preyed on hitchhikers wandering the roads. He held them captive, then tortured and raped them. When that didn't satisfy his warped cravings, he killed instead.
Across the nation, a serial rapist targeted unsuspecting women. It was only a matter of time till his dark urges raged out of control and led him to murder. He followed a path so random, it was impossible to trace, and all that tied him to his crimes were his access to the highways and a bizarre sexual fetish. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When investigators believed the suspect had committed dozens of murders, the FBI was determined to put the brakes on his nationwide rampage.
February 5th, 1990. On a road in Houston, Texas, 18-year-old Nicole Tuttle desperately tried to flag down passing motorists. Someone finally stopped for the bruised and bleeding woman.
Oh my God. There's a guy trying to kill me. There's a guy trying to kill me.
The driver took her to the closest phone to call police.
Please help.
At the Houston police station, Nicole told officers that she had been kidnapped and assaulted, but she'd managed to escape.
I have to get out.
Her ordeal began in California 1 week earlier. On January 29th, she hitched a ride from a trucker at a rest stop. He said his name was Dusty and that he was headed east through Arizona. After a few hours on the road, she fell asleep in the back compartment of his truck. It seemed that was exactly what he was waiting for. He climbed in back and overpowered her. Before she was fully awake, he chained her to the walls and gagged her with a horse bit. The trucker whipped her and pierced her with pins and fishhooks. He also raped and sodomized her. Nicole told police that she was chained inside the cab for 6 days. Her ordeal didn't end there. Inside his Houston apartment, the trucker allowed her to bathe, then chained her to the bed and raped her again. She watched helplessly as he approached her with a straight razor. He pressed the blade close to her scalp and began to slice off her hair. After 3 hours, he forced her back into the truck. This time, he failed to bind her. When they stopped at a brewery, he left her alone as he walked inside to sign for his new freight.
Do you know how many days that you were in the truck?
Nicole knew this might be her only chance.
Where did you...
She ran for it, still wearing a dog leash around her neck.
I needed to go to California.
Houston police stopped a trucker in the area whose rig fit Nicole's description.
And it...
She said he was not the man who attacked her. A background check revealed no outstanding warrants or convictions, so police released the trucker. Nicole told the officers to stop searching. She was too frightened to testify against her attacker. She just wanted to go home to California. On February 5th, the same day that Nicole escaped, another young woman was on the highway thumbing for rides. Just 15 miles away in Pasadena, Texas, 14-year-old Regina K. Walters was running away with her new boyfriend. Her parents were divorced, and Regina usually stayed with her father in Houston. She'd been visiting her mother for a few days when she fled and began hitchhiking. Whether she was following the lead of her new teenage boyfriend or just testing her independence, the trucker soon stopped for the pretty young girl. Regina's mother, Carolyn Walters, was a single mom who worked long hours as a department store clerk. When she came home from work, she was surprised to find her daughter was not home.
Regina?
Her daughter did not answer.
Regina?
Carolyn found no notes and saw no other signs that her daughter had been back to the house. She checked the answering machine, but Regina had left no messages. Carolyn called her daughter's friends and Regina's father in Houston.
Hello, Chris.
No one had heard from the girl.
Is Regina there?
The distraught mother reported her daughter as a missing person to Pasadena, Texas police.
I'm Detective Jackson. How are you?
She spoke with a detective from the juvenile section, providing the officer with Regina's description. Her 14-year-old daughter was about 5 feet tall, weighed 95 pounds, and had long, curly brown hair. The detective asked Carolyn what steps she had taken so far to find her.
Has anyone heard from her?
Carolyn had posted missing persons flyers, but no one had yet responded. The worried mother hadn't heard from her daughter since they argued 2 nights before. At 9:30 that night, Regina told her mother she was going to visit a friend.
I just think you ought to stay home tonight.
When Carolyn objected, the girl insisted she would be right back.
No, it's not. Well, I want... Regina, what?
Against her better judgment, Carolyn relented, trusting that Regina would call if she stayed out later.
But you can go ahead.
Though the young teen had a history of running away, she always returned on her own.
Anybody about her parents or where she is right now?
Her mother believed this time was different.
Does she have a boyfriend?
Pasadena, Texas Police Detective Suzanne Jackson of the Juvenile Division was assigned the case. She understood Carolyn's concern.
Several days passed, and Regina would normally call her mom when she would leave home and let her mother know that she was okay and that she was just out. She would be back when she was ready to come home, and she had not done that.
You can just set those up there.
Carolyn posted more flyers at the convenience store close to her house. She held out hope that her daughter was unharmed. Maybe she was simply staying with a friend. Along with Regina's photo and description, Carolyn offered a reward for information on her daughter's whereabouts. "5 days after Regina's disappearance, Carolyn received a phone call.
You know someone who's been with my daughter?
The caller had seen Regina talking to 2 young men on the evening she left her mother's house.
Okay.
The person only knew the men as Billy and Ricky,
Bye-bye now.
but she remembered that Billy had a girlfriend with a peculiar name of Urena. Carolyn immediately called police.
Speak to Detective Jackson, please.
The following day, a second caller gave Carolyn the address of an apartment where he had seen Regina at a party 2 days before.
Here it is.
When police arrived, no one answered.
Okay.
The manager told them the apartment was rented to a man named Billy Wayne Gibbs. The next morning, the detective told her colleagues about the case. She mentioned she was looking for Gibbs in connection with Regina's disappearance. She was also looking for 2 others, a woman named Urena and a man named Ricky. She didn't know their last names. To her surprise, the officers did. Billy Wayne Gibbs had a girlfriend named Urena Sweet and a friend named Ricky Lee Jones. The 3 were wanted in connection with an auto theft. Units were dispatched to Gibbs' apartment to wait for his return. Officers patrolled the nearby road. After several hours of surveillance, they picked up 17-year-old Gibbs and his girlfriend Urena near his apartment. Police handcuffed the young couple and brought them to the station for questioning. The third suspect, Ricky Lee Jones, was still at large. The arresting officer asked Gibbs if he had seen Regina or Ricky Lee Jones. Gibbs said he had spoken to them 4 days ago, but not since. He told police that Ricky and Regina were in love and planned to run away to Mexico where Ricky had relatives. The detectives suspected that 18-year-old Jones had another reason for leaving town. If he were caught with Regina, he could be charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor.
Regina was 14, and they obviously were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. When they saw the flyers that the mother had left out with a reward on her location, they decided that it would be best to leave the area so they wouldn't be caught. And that's when they decided to leave the area, hitchhike to Mexico.
The detective learned that Ricky Lee Jones was already on probation for theft. Fleeing jurisdiction was a parole violation. She issued a warrant for his arrest. She also fed Regina's description into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, a database listing both victims and criminals nationwide. If Regina were located by any police department in the country, Pasadena, Texas police would be notified. Until then, with no known address or vehicle, it would be difficult to find the pair. 15 miles away, Houston police interviewed Jerry Walters, Regina's divorced father. He told them he had received a disturbing call on his unlisted home number on the evening of March 17th. The conversation was brief, and Walters did not recognize the caller's voice. The man asked, "Are you Regina's father?" When Walters replied yes, the man told him he knew where to find Regina. He said she was in a loft of a barn, and that there had been some changes. He had cut the girl's hair. Regina's father asked if she was dead or alive. The caller hung up without answering. Detective Jackson asked Southwestern Bell to trace the call. The company told her it would take several days. Police would simply have to wait. Aside from the phone records, the trail of the missing 14-year-old and her boyfriend was stone cold. In March of 1990, Pasadena, Texas police detective Suzanne Jackson continued her search for 14-year-old Regina K. Walters. The girl hadn't been seen since early February when she left a friend's house with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones. The detective's only lead was an anonymous phone call made to Regina's father on March 17th. The call had yet to be traced. On the same night Regina's father received his call in Houston, her mother in Pasadena, Texas also got a call.
Hello?
She recorded the conversation as police had advised.
Yeah.
An unknown man told Carolyn to meet him at 6:30 the next morning at the local convenience store. He had something to tell her about Regina, and he wanted to say it in person. Without giving his name or description, he hung up. Carolyn called Detective Jackson, who told her it was risky to meet the man. When Carolyn insisted, Jackson said police would go with her for protection. From a distance, officers kept an eye on Carolyn as she waited at the convenience store for the unknown caller. She had no way of knowing if the man knew who she was, and no way to identify him. Her only hope was if he would approach her. She studied everyone who came in and out, and everyone who used the phone. Carolyn waited over 2 hours. The caller never came forward. 2 days later, Pasadena, Texas police received the phone records for both calls to Regina's parents. They learned that the call to Regina's father in Houston was made from a gas station in Ennis, Texas, 200 miles northwest of where she was last seen. The call to her mother's home in Pasadena, Texas, was made from a payphone only a few blocks away.
At that particular time, it was obvious that we were becoming very concerned about Regina's whereabouts with the phone calls and the information that we received. We were pretty sure that there was going to be foul play involved.
2 weeks later, Carolyn told Detective Jackson that the man who had called her before wanted to set up another meeting at the same convenience store. Police traced the call to a nearby payphone. The caller had already fled. On April 23rd, police found a partial skeleton of a small female near a riverbank in Pasadena, Texas. They determined the young girl's age and weight was close to Regina's. Detective Suzanne Jackson brought Regina's dental records to the medical examiner.
I went to the ME's office with my information. We did a comparison on some dental x-rays and found that this particular person was not Regina.
Months went by with no leads. Regina's parents feared the worst. On October 12th, 2 boys were playing near a dirt road in Manville, Texas, 26 miles south of Houston. Close to the road, they came across a wood pile. They found something they'd never forget. Human remains. They ran home to tell their parents, who called police. Officers arrived and secured the area. They could not identify the body at the site. It was too badly decomposed, and there was no wallet or identification nearby. All police could guess was that the victim was a child or young adult. They hoped an autopsy would tell them more. The Pasadena, Texas detective traveled to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office, bringing Regina's dental records.
So you almost have a match right
The
there.
ME compared those records to x-rays taken of the corpse.
But then you get everything you can obviously.
They did not match.
It was a little disappointing, although we were very relieved that it was not Regina. Her parents at this particular point were concerned that we were going to be recovering a body and we were not going to be locating Regina alive, and they were ready for some type of closure at this point.
As the search continued in Texas through the fall of 1990, a farmer prepared to burn down his old barn in Bond County, Illinois. He hadn't been inside in years. The farmer climbed up into the hayloft to make one last check of the place. He looked through the abandoned building, but found only items long since discarded. Nothing seemed especially unusual or out of place. Then, something caught his eye. He looked closer at the strewn hay and saw a skeleton that appeared to be human. The farmer immediately called police. In October of 1990, as Detective Jackson hunted in Texas for 14-year-old Regina K. Walters, a decayed body was found in the hayloft of an abandoned barn in Bond County, Illinois. Agent Mike Sheely of the Illinois State Police responded to the scene.
I had received a call from the local sheriff's office in Bond County, Illinois, and they had instructed me that they had found a body in a rural setting near the interstate, Interstate 70, which is a major interstate that travels through Bond County.
Crime scene technicians conducted a thorough search of the barn. No clothes were found on or near the body. There was no wallet or other ID. They did find a single white thread close to the bones that seemed too new to have been in the old barn for long. Police photographed the remains from various angles. They found baling wire that matched the wire wrapped around the corpse's neck. Some hair remained on the head. Because the skull was so small, police believed the victim was probably a child. The people of nearby Greenville had not seen a murder in 10 years. The anonymity of this crime was especially disturbing. Police had no way of knowing if the victim was from the area or just dumped there by someone passing through on nearby Interstate 70. At first, they weren't even sure of the corpse's age or sex. Forensic anthropologist Mark Johnsey was called in to conduct an examination. He made several discoveries that helped Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely begin to identify the victim.
Mark was able to determine that it was a young female between the ages of 14 to 16, her approximate weight, which was 90 to 110 pounds. There was indication that her hair had been cut. The distal ends had begun to grow again, but the forensics had told us that it was recent.
The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The killer had almost severed the victim's head by twisting baling wire around her neck 16 times.
That's what we found.
From the condition of the joints and vertebrae, Johnsey discerned that the girl was killed almost a year before. A forensic scientist analyzed the white fiber found close to the body. Maybe it would yield a clue to what the young girl or her murderer had been wearing. He determined the fiber was mostly cotton, but it didn't come from clothing. It likely came from a towel. Searching the National Crime Database, State Agent Mike Sheely listed the Illinois Jane Doe as a white female, 14 to 16 years of age, probably killed as early as September 1989.
We were alarmed to find that there was 950 matches with the age group and the category and the time frame, which made the task very difficult to begin the identification process.
He narrowed the field to about 100 by specifying the victim's time of death closer to the spring of 1990. The investigator then sent teletypes to law enforcement agencies working those cases. The detective investigating the disappearance of Regina Walters in Pasadena, Texas, received the teletype on October 16th. She believed the body's description fit Regina's and phoned the Bond County Sheriff's Office in Illinois. The receptionist told her they had gotten so many responses that the sheriff would have to call her back. Before she hung up, the detective remembered the mysterious phone call Regina's father had received. The caller had said the girl was in a barn.
When I asked her if the body was found in a barn, she immediately transferred me to the sheriff, in which I started talking to him right away. And it was immediately discovered that it was possibly Regina, and so we immediately jumped on that and started sending the teletypes back and forth.
The detective asked another question based on the March 17th phone call to Regina's father. Did the girl in the barn have shorn hair? The Illinois authorities confirmed that she did. The girl found in Illinois matched the caller's description of Regina.
We sent a copy of dental x-rays to Greenville, Illinois, to the sheriff's office, and those dental x-rays were matched with the body that was discovered there, and it was confirmed to be Regina's body.
One question remained. Where was Regina's boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones? Detectives called on the FBI for help. Special Agent Mark Young, a behavioral expert in the Houston field office, was assigned as case agent.
And I tried to go in and contact every person that had any involvement with Ricky or Regina. I wanted to see if there was anything that they mentioned that would have proven valuable to locating Ricky.
At his former high school, Pasadena, Texas detectives also continued to pursue Ricky Lee Jones.
That's right, you did. When you called, just a second, please.
A guidance counselor said that Jones had not been enrolled in school for the past year.
He was in school last. Okay, do you have any information I need?
She had little other information about him, though she did provide his last known address.
It's pretty old.
It was the home of Jones's family. His sister Tammy was the only one there. She said that no one in the family had seen Ricky for over a year.
A year? You haven't seen him in a year?
They had written him off as a bad kid, believing he'd end up in prison.
A year? Yeah.
The detective asked if they had relatives in Mexico.
I guess they figured he was in jail or something.
Tammy said her mother had some in Matamoros, just south of the Texas border.
Have you seen her?
Jackson showed her a photo of Regina, but Tammy didn't recognize her.
Okay, that's the last time. Has he left?
Ricky was already listed as wanted because he had violated his probation. So we felt like maybe he was afraid to come home if he did know anything about Regina's disappearance and her death. We were in fear that he may not want to call and tell us what had happened or may be involved himself.
As Special Agent Mark Young pored over the details of the case, he developed a profile of Regina's killer. The agent determined that 18-year-old Ricky Lee Jones probably did not commit the crime.
If Ricky Lee Jones had murdered Regina, he would have done it in a fit of anger, and that would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene. You got the impression that this is an older person, a white male, a traveler, truck driver, traveling salesman, somebody that had a reason to be across the country.
The fact that the barn was close to an interstate supported Agent Young's theory. The crime scene told the agent more about the sadistic murderer. He had stripped off Regina's clothing, killed her slowly by strangulation, and most notably, had cut Regina's long hair.
Whoever did this crime was doing things beyond what was necessary to perpetrate the crime. Maybe a sexual predator or sexual sadist, a person that had other offenses also.
Investigators were alerted to another crime in the town of Marshall, Texas, 200 miles north of Houston. Partial skeletal remains of a young man were found, washed up on a creek bank. The skull had been perforated on the left side by a small caliber firearm. Though there was little evidence to positively identify the body, the victim's age and location led police to conclude it was probably Ricky Lee Jones.
I came to the conclusion that there were no other leads to cover in this case. For all intents and purposes, the case was closed in our division. We had nowhere else to go.
To investigators, it looked like the man who had killed Regina K. Walters and her boyfriend had gotten away with murder. As the hunt for a sadistic killer ground to a halt in Pasadena, Texas, 1,000 miles west in Arizona, authorities encountered a problem on their own highways. An Arizona highway patrolman was at the end of his shift when he came across a tractor-trailer parked on the side of an interstate on-ramp. The rig had to be moved. It was a hazard to passing motorists. He noticed the lights were on and the engine was still running.
Get back, buddy, get back, get back!
As he approached the driver's door, Officer Michael Miller recalled that a man suddenly burst out of the cab and immediately spread his arms against the truck.
And I asked him, I said, what's going on? And he said, nothing, officer, we're doing just fine. He said, there's no problem. I've got a gun in my back pocket. And he motioned to his back pocket and then put his hands up on the side of his truck. This was kind of an unusual situation. And I could still hear the woman screaming on the inside of the truck.
Miller cuffed Robert Ben Rhodes and escorted the trucker back to his car to question him further.
He said it was just fine. They were there together in a, I guess you would call it, consenting situation. And, but I didn't know if the screams coming from the woman were the fact that she was startled, she was surprised, but I was going to find out what the situation was.
With Rhodes's hands cuffed behind his back, Miller seatbelted him into the patrol car. The officer returned to the truck to check on the frantic woman. He found her handcuffed to the walls by her wrists and ankles.
You all right, ma'am? You all right?
The patrolman assured her she was no longer in danger.
I told her, ma'am, you're going to need to remain here until I can get some help out here, because this is a criminal or a crime scene, and some detectives are going to have to look at this. I said, just remain calm. This man is not going to be back to bother you again. Just remain calm. I left the truck and moved back to my patrol car.
Miller returned just in time. Rhodes had maneuvered his cuffed hands in front of him and released his seatbelt. He was about to open the car door. The officer quickly recuffed him.
There is no actual routine stop out there in the road that no matter what you come across out there, you never know who you're dealing with. And it kind of sent a chill up my spine to know that if this man, as cool as he was, could have probably killed me and the girl at the same time and still been on the road.
Police from the town of Casa Grande arrived on the scene. They freed the woman and transported her and Rhodes to the police station for further questioning. Inside the truck, they found a gruesome array of torture tools. Chains that attached to rings welded to the back of the sleeper compartment, fishhooks, bloody towels, a horse bit, and a briefcase filled with the implements of a sexual sadist. They also found a camera in the briefcase, along with several hairs that did not belong to the woman found in the truck. Casa Grande Police Detective Rick Barnhart led the investigation.
Robert Rhodes had what I refer to as a rape kit in his truck. He had all kinds of paraphernalia. He had long sticks with clips on the end where he would draw and quarter his victims. He had whips. And just based on that, I knew Robert Rhodes was a predator.
Just north of Phoenix, the truck stopped.
The woman found chained in Rhodes's truck was 27-year-old Kathleen Vine.
I've never had any problems before.
She told the detective she had been picked up about an hour earlier from the Rip Griffin's truck stop north of Phoenix.
He was trying to rape.
When she dozed off in the sleeper compartment, the trucker climbed back, assaulted her, and chained her to the walls. The man told her his name was Whips and Chains, and that he'd been doing this for 15 years. Police photographed her injuries, wrist burns from the handcuffs, and welts from the beatings. She tried to fight off her attacker, but her hands were chained. All she could do to defend herself was to bite him. She managed to injure his left shoulder enough to distract him from raping her. Kathleen agreed to press assault and kidnapping charges, but Detective Barnhart believed she might be problematic for the prosecution.
My interview with Kathleen was really sort of bizarre. She would talk about this reality, this terrible assault that she endured, and then periodically she would revert back to a story about her traveling across the country to see the president. She told me she wanted to give the president a microchip, and she talked about the underground prison where no one escapes from. And all this time my heart was sinking because I needed Kathleen to tell a very lucid story about the horrible incident that happened to her.
The detective asked trucker Robert Ben Rhodes for his version of events. Rhodes said Kathleen was crazy and described her as a lot lizard, the trucker's term for a woman who trades sex for rides. He claimed that she solicited him and that she liked it rough, though they never actually had sex. He refused to provide any details about what happened in the truck's sleeper compartment. He talked around the subject, never admitting to any crime.
Can you please remove your...
Police photographed Rhodes's wound. It looked like a bite mark on his left shoulder, just as Kathleen had described. Rhodes claimed he sustained the injury while loading his truck, but Detective Barnhart believed Kathleen's story.
She told me she tried to bite his throat, but he moved and she bit him on the left upper shoulder. And we've got a photo of her bite mark, and her story completely corroborated, what happened in that sleeper cab.
Local prosecutors arrested Robert Ben Rhodes and held him for aggravated assault, sexual assault, and unlawful imprisonment. But their only witness, Kathleen Vine, suffered from paranoid delusions. To keep him behind bars, they needed additional witnesses. Kathleen's claim that Rhodes had been kidnapping women for 15 years haunted Detective Barnhart. He entered Rhodes's name into the NCIC in case other agencies had reported similar crimes. As the detective pursued the case, it made headlines across the Southwest. A Houston police officer was among those who read about it. The trucker detained in Arizona sounded like the same man who was stopped outside of Houston earlier in the year. Police suspected Rhodes had held a woman captive in his truck for 6 days, raping and torturing her until she finally escaped. They were unable to press charges since the woman failed to identify him. Houston Police Sergeant Bomar described the case to Detective Barnhart.
I was contacted by Sergeant Bomar. His was the case where the young lady escaped. I was fairly positive that Robert Rhodes was at least a serial rapist. I had suspicions that he might be a murderer.
Since Rhodes had crossed state lines since his last crime, Detective Barnhart contacted the FBI to request assistance. He hoped that with the FBI's support, he could gather enough evidence of the trucker's serial sex crimes to build a case that would stick. Special Agent Bob Lee of the Houston FBI field office knew the place to start was in Rhodes's Houston apartment. He spoke to Rhodes's landlord. She had checked the apartment after the trucker's arrest and was horrified to find bloodied torture devices. Based on her statement, Agent Lee secured a warrant to search the premises.
We know that serial rapists often keep souvenirs from their victims, whether it be a piece of clothing or a piece of jewelry or whatever. When we went in, we found bondage paraphernalia, we found chains, we found handcuffs, we found a rack that someone could be tied to. We found a lot of women's jewelry.
Agents and Houston police also found bloody white towels, women's clothing, and stacks of photographs. The snapshots depicted some women with shorn hair in various states of undress, bound and bruised. Investigators believe that Rhodes shot the photos as souvenirs of his crimes to relive his victims' terror. Though agents now had evidence that Rhodes was likely a serial rapist, they were unable to identify any of his victims from the photos. With no additional witnesses, the case in Arizona was still weak. Prosecutors' only witness, Kathleen Vine, was questionable. A trial would be a contest of he said, she said, and a mentally disturbed woman might leave jurors unconvinced. By December 1990, the best Arizona prosecutors could do was to offer Rhodes a deal. 6 years, including time served and work release eligibility, if he pled guilty to the charges against Vine. His attorney accepted. In about a year, Rhodes could be out on parole, stalking new prey. By October 1991, a year after 14-year-old Regina K. Walters was found murdered in Illinois, her case remained unsolved. Special Agent Mark Young, an FBI profiler, predicted the murderer was probably a trucker or traveling salesman with prior sexual offenses. His signature behavior was to hack off his victim's hair. Agent Young spoke to area law enforcement agencies hoping they had open cases that might match the profile.
One day, Bob Lee, who was an agent in the FBI on the Violent Crime Squad, overheard me talking on the phone to a police officer. And he said, hey, I had a case I had worked a few months back where a truck driver kidnapped a young girl and her head hair was cut just like you're saying.
The victim's name was Nicole Tuttle. She had also been raped repeatedly and had escaped the day Regina Walters and Ricky Lee Jones were last seen alive, on Monday, February 5th, 1990. That same day, Houston police had stopped a trucker named Robert Ben Rhodes, who fit Nicole's description of her attacker. At the time, she told the officers it was the wrong man. Special Agent Bob Lee from the FBI's Houston field office recalled that Nicole later changed her story in the hospital where she was treated for her wounds.
Later that night, she told the detectives that Robert Ben Rhodes was in fact the individual that had kidnapped her. When asked if she wanted to press charges, she told the police officer that all she wanted to do was go home.
Lee also told Agent Young that Nicole was not the trucker's only victim. Rhodes was serving time in an Arizona prison for the assault of Kathleen Vine and was eligible for work release in just 3 months. The agent then described the search of the trucker's residence.
And he said, we found some photographs in his apartment, some of his own pictures, with somebody else with short hair, who it seems like she was at a barn.
The chilling photos portrayed a young girl at different locations, wearing a variety of seductive outfits. At the barn, she was in a black dress, shielding herself from Rhodes's camera.
When I saw those photos, I said, this is Regina Walters. In order to verify that, I went to the family and I got several of their pictures, and there are facial characteristics and markings that exactly duplicated the pictures Rhodes took.
The FBI began to build a kidnapping and murder case against Robert Ben Rhodes. They revisited the evidence from the search of Rhodes's apartment and found more photos of Regina. They also found several articles of women's clothing, including a black dress, which lab examiners confirmed was the dress Regina had worn in the photos. Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely was notified. He forwarded the evidence found in the Greenville barn to the FBI lab in Houston. Lab examiners discovered that the cotton fiber recovered in Illinois was consistent with the bloody towels found in Rhodes's Houston apartment, but the results were inconclusive since that type of towel was so common. Detective Jackson from Pasadena, Texas, met with agents Sheely, Young, and Lee at the Houston FBI field office to discuss what they needed for a solid indictment against Rhodes, not only for Regina's murder, but for crimes against his other nameless victims. With Rhodes nearing his release date, Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely knew they were racing against the clock.
He was eligible for parole, and that he was actually eligible to work outside the prison almost on a release system. And so we were under pressure to have the indictments and to get him arrested on our charges.
You have a seat here.
Agents interviewed Rhodes's former Houston employer, Mike Eggleton. The trucking firm owner was not surprised to see him. Eggleton had been questioned by authorities about Rhodes before. A few years back, local police suspected the trucker of assaulting a woman in the back of his rig, but no formal charges were ever filed. The truck Rhodes had driven had been sold, but Eggleton provided its vehicle identification number, as well as Rhodes's trucking logs and fuel receipts. While agents waited for a trace to come back on the truck's ID number, the team began to assemble a timeline of the trucker's travels. Agents found fuel receipts from a gas station in Ennis, Texas, dated March 17, 1990, the same place and date as the call made to Regina's father, Jerry Walters.
Oklahoma City.
Several of the local calls to Regina's mother, Carolyn, also coincided with Rhodes's time in Houston. One question about the calls remained. The killer could easily have gotten Carolyn's number from missing persons flyers posted around town. But how had he gotten Jerry Walters' unlisted home number? Agent Young found the answer in evidence stored in Arizona.
It was in that evidence that we located Regina Walters' little spiral notebook. And the front cover was all of her personal information, her mother's address and phone number, and her father's.
When Young flipped the notebook over, he found something even more disturbing. A message that he believed was written by Rhodes himself. A knife and gun were drawn above a phrase that appeared to have blood dripping off its letters. The phrase read, "Ricky's a dead man." Only a DNA test would confirm if the partial remains of the young man found in southeast Texas was Ricky Lee Jones. Unfortunately, investigators lacked a known source of Jones's DNA to perform a comparison.
And everywhere else.
Since Rhodes claimed to have been abducting and torturing his victims for the past 15 years, the team submitted their timeline to VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, an FBI database that lists thousands of solved and unsolved crimes nationwide. Despite the limited information and gaps in the timeline, Detective Jackson was not surprised when the system returned over 50 possible matches with open homicide and missing persons cases.
His trips from Houston to Baltimore to LA and back in a matter of 4 to 5 days at a time could just give you an idea of how many people he has access to and remote locations that he could abuse these people and dispose of them.
A week later, agents tracked down Rhodes's truck in Houston. 2 years had passed since Rhodes had driven the rig. The cab had since been steam cleaned, repainted, and used by other drivers. But evidence of his crimes somehow survived. Investigators recovered a single strand of head hair that was consistent with Regina's. Miraculously, they also found a small fingerprint on the vinyl upholstery in the sleeper compartment that matched her prints. That proved she had been in the truck, but it did not prove when or whether she'd been there against her will. By January of 1992, almost 2 years after Regina had disappeared, investigators determined the evidence was not decisive enough to prove interstate kidnapping. They dropped the federal case. With Rhodes's parole hearing just a week away, investigators convinced the Bond County prosecutor to press charges in Illinois for capital murder. They knew the evidence was circumstantial, but they pressed on.
I feared that he could escape, and I also believe that due to the overcrowding in the prison systems and those sort of things, that he could be released.
On February 6th, investigators traveled to the Arizona State Prison in Florence to serve the warrant to Rhodes. Their plan was to confront Rhodes with photos of Regina, hoping to prompt a confession. An incriminating statement would bolster their case. The suspected serial killer was unfazed, even smug.
We spent approximately an hour with him, but Rhodes was unwilling to speak with us and denied any involvement in the death, and was very firm in his denials. And at that point, we knew that we were going to have to prove our case.
Agents believed Rhodes knew they were fishing for a confession because their evidence was weak. They suspected this arrogant man was betting he could beat the charges. Maybe he believed that they didn't care enough about his victims to earn a conviction.
A lot of serial offenders, whether they're killers or other sexual predators, will pick victims that they consider the forgotten people. Because they're banking on that element that law enforcement and society doesn't really care about hitchhikers or less wealthy people, less established folks. He preyed on that type of person in the hopes that he wouldn't get the attention that did happen.
Almost 2 years after the death of Regina K. Walters and the kidnapping and sexual assault of at least 2 other women, Robert Ben Rhodes was extradited from Arizona to stand trial in Illinois. He and his attorney managed to delay the trial date for 6 months. On September 11th, the overconfident trucker lost his nerve. In a Bond County, Illinois courthouse, his attorney pled down the capital murder charge that carried a possible death sentence. He accepted an offer of first-degree murder with a penalty of life. Rhodes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even as he serves his time in the maximum security prison in Chester, Illinois, investigators have not abandoned the case. They continue to gather evidence, committed to proving that Regina K. Walters was not Rhodes' only murder victim.
There is one other picture of a female as yet unidentified that got into the truck with him. We're somewhat concerned whether that may be another victim. Anybody that gets into the comfort zone of the truck of a serial killer may potentially be another murder victim.
Investigators continue to work on identifying the unknown women from Rhodes's past in hopes of bringing the small comfort of closure to their grieving families. In the summer of 1988, a wealthy Jackson, Mississippi woman disappeared from her home in broad daylight. The only clue left behind was a mysterious ransom note. The FBI and local police struggled to find answers in its cryptic message so they could find the kidnapper and retrieve the victim before her time ran out.
'A daring kidnapping and a bizarre ransom note baffled Mississippi authorities. The victim was the wife of a wealthy businessman. A list of 12 names and a few drops of blood were the only clues to her fate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The ransom note gave the FBI its first leads, but the case was not so clear-cut. Solving it required the keen insight of a criminal profiler and the perseverance of a family, local authorities, and the FBI.
"6 a.m., July 26, 1988. The heat of a midsummer day would soon bear down on the southern city of Jackson, Mississippi. Like every weekday for the past 48 years, Annie Laurie Herron had coffee with her husband Robert before he left for work. As early investors in oil, the Herrons had become one of Mississippi's wealthiest couples, with a fortune estimated at more than $100 million. That day, Annie Laurie Herron would host her bridge club at home, the same house where she raised 2 children and lived with her husband since they were newlyweds. By 3:30, Mrs. Herron's bridge game was over and her friends had left. The housekeeper finished cleaning up after the card game and checked if Mrs. Herron needed anything else. The 73-year-old woman said everything was fine. Annie Herron planned to spend the rest of her afternoon reading until her husband returned. She wasn't expecting anyone, but perhaps one of the bridge players or the housekeeper had forgotten something. Her husband wasn't due home for an hour.
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. I got to see your husband. I have a letter.
I'm back to see him.
Not on my way at all. Let me...
Annie Laurie Herron was on her own. At about 4:30 that afternoon, Robert Herron returned from work.
Annie, I'm home.
He saw that his wife wasn't home and figured she was out with her friends or daughter. When she hadn't returned by 5:30, he thought it was strange that his wife of 48 years hadn't called or left a note.
Annie.
The house seemed to be empty.
Annie.
Robert grew concerned and began calling family and friends.
Anywhere that I can tell?
No one had seen Annie since the bridge game.
Maybe we're going to have to do something else. Thank you.
Robert's son-in-law, who lived nearby, said he would be right over. The son-in-law said he and his wife hadn't heard from Mrs. Herron that day.
Right here.
Robert Herron pointed out that when Annie left the house, she usually took her purse.
I've looked everywhere.
But his wife's purse and shoes sat beside her reading chair. Her newspaper and glasses were nearby.
You know, we're just... I just don't know what to say.
Robert was worried since Mrs. Herron's medicine for a chronic intestinal disease was still in the bathroom. She would need to take it soon or she would not be able to absorb food. The men continued to search for some indication of where she'd gone. A piece of paper near the front door caught the son-in-law's eye. It was a ransom note without specific instructions. Annie Laurie Herron had been kidnapped.
We've got to do something real fast.
The note demanded that Robert Herron pay 12 separate men before 10 days passed, but it didn't say how much or where to send the money. He was ordered not to call police, so he waited for a ransom call with instructions on getting his wife back. When none came by nightfall, he contacted the Jackson Police Department despite being warned not to. Officers secured the ransom note, hoping to keep any fingerprints intact. Processing the house for evidence, officers discovered a trace of what appeared to be blood on the front door frame. Laboratory tests would later reveal that it was blood and that it matched Mrs. Herron's blood type. A Jackson police detective interviewed Robert Herron. They wanted to know if he or his wife had ever been threatened.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
He had no idea who would want to harm
It
them.
was there for me to find. It's a ransom.
If Mrs. Herron were without her medication for long, her intestinal condition would become critical.
Just hold it just like that.
Kidnapping is a crime that must be solved quickly, or the chances of rescuing the victim are slim. That evening, Jackson police contacted Special Agent Patrick McGlennon of the FBI's Jackson Field Office to bring the resources of the federal government to bear right away.
Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI has jurisdiction whenever an individual is kidnapped in the United States. The presumption in this case, of course, was a kidnapping had occurred, a ransom demand had been made, and the possibility of travel interstate is in fact why the FBI gets involved in these types of matters.
The FBI called U.S. Attorney James Tucker, who would advise investigators in legal matters as the case developed. Like most residents of Jackson, Tucker had great admiration for the Herrons.
Robert Herron was a self-made man, and at the time of this incident, which was 1988, Mr. Herron was probably considered one of the foremost financial wizards here in the Jackson area. He was well known in the business community. He was a generous person, so he was becoming well known for his particular acts of generosity.
By dawn the next day, FBI agents and evidence technicians arrived at the Herrons' home. The Jackson police detective filled in the case agent on what they'd learned so far. The FBI set up a satellite command post at the residence and tapped the Herrons' phone, ready to trace any ransom calls. There was little doubt that multi-millionaire Robert Herron was the real target. Yet Mr. Herron hadn't been told what to pay to get his wife back.
It was impossible to comply, or nearly impossible to comply, with the demands because they were nonspecific in nature. Mrs. Herron was not even mentioned in the note. There was no provision for her safe return.
The note did say that the 12 men listed had been involved in the same photography company. Robert Herron explained that he had once served as chairman of the board for that company. Some of the company's franchisees had been sued to recoup losses, but Herron did not know which ones. It seemed unlikely that the 12 men named had kidnapped Mrs. Herron, but perhaps one or more of them was striking back at the company through Robert Herron. Technicians collected samples of all the writing pads and paper in the Herrons' home. They would compare the paper to the ransom note to see if it had been written on the stock from the house. The results would take a few days. Investigators searched outside the house for hairs, blood, clothing. anything that might reveal the kidnapper's identity. They looked for cigarette butts or evidence of food or drink, signs that someone had been watching the house. They found nothing.
Yesterday afternoon.
Neighbors and domestic workers reported seeing nothing strange at the house the previous afternoon, and no one had seen Mrs. Heron leave.
Quiet neighborhood, we should.
The next day, agents continued canvassing the Herons' neighborhood.
Dr. Posey?
They questioned a doctor who lived down the street.
Detective Johnson, Jackson Police Department would like that.
He said that he had seen something in the neighborhood recently that might be related to the kidnapping. 2 weeks earlier, the doctor was going to run errands when he drove past a white van parked near his house. From that position, anyone in the van would have a clear view of the Heron house.
Around here? Yeah, about 50 blocks.
At first, the doctor thought nothing of it. But when he'd returned home hours later, the van was still there. Thinking the driver needed help, the doctor offered his assistance.
Can I help you with anything? Wondering if you need some help.
The driver responded by asking if there was a law against parking in the neighborhood. It was an odd response, enough to make the doctor remember the incident.
Thank you, sir. If you think of anything else...
He said the van drove away minutes later.
Thank you, Dr. Posey.
Agents continued to canvass the Herons' neighborhood and found another neighbor who had seen a white van on the street 3 months earlier.
The other neighbor had seen a van similar to that described by the first individual, sitting almost directly in front of the Heron residence in the very earliest days of April of 1988. She was suspicious enough of the van to get the license plate number.
If investigators could find that van, they might also find Mrs. Heron. But a computer check revealed that the license plate had been stolen from a car at the New Orleans airport. It was another dead end. After 36 hours of investigation and no ransom calls, agents hoped lab results on the note would provide a fresh lead to Mrs. Heron or her abductor. FBI examiners first determined that the note had been typed on paper foreign to the Herons' home. They also compared the typeface to known samples from every typewriter made in this century.
The laboratory division was able to determine that the demand letter was in fact typed by a Royal typewriter manufactured between 1912 and 1927. There was nothing else contained on the demand letter which would give analysts any type of ability to tell us the manufacturer of the paper or whether there were any indented writing or other evidence on the letter.
A latent fingerprint examination revealed nothing, and a spot on the note believed to be a bloodstain was too small to analyze. Although no evidence on the note helped agents, they hoped its message would. The note demanded that Robert Heron pay 12 men who were involved with a photography company. Perhaps the kidnapper was among them. Agents learned that the company had foreclosed on each of the 12 men, all former franchisees, to collect heavy debts. One of the company's executives provided the FBI with company files and photos of those men.
Are you going to have to take those with you?
Yes, sir.
One was now deceased. The others were scattered throughout the country.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
At the FBI's Jackson field office, agents split up the 11 names and began to review the files and photographs. They sent leads to FBI offices in the towns and cities where the men currently lived, requesting additional information. Agents found that many had financial troubles. They tried to ascertain if those men had traveled near the Heron neighborhood when the white van was spotted there, and again recently when the kidnapping occurred. FBI agents across the country began covert surveillance on the former franchisees. They hoped one of the men would lead them to the ailing 73-year-old woman. But as the kidnapping investigation stretched into its third day, only 7 days remained on the ransom note deadline, and agents still lacked instructions on how to recover Annie Laurie Heron alive.
Hi, how are you, ma'am?
3 days had passed since Annie Laurie Heron, an elderly grandmother, had been abducted from her Jackson, Mississippi home in broad daylight. The FBI continued surveillance on 11 men named in the ransom note found inside the Herons' home. Agents couldn't confront the men. A frightened kidnapper might harm the victim. Special Agent Patrick McGlennon hoped one of them would lead to the missing woman.
We wanted to determine if they were traveling even small distances from their residences or business. We wanted to see if they perhaps were keeping Mrs. Heron at a remote location where they might have to provide food, water, other conveniences for her, that they wouldn't want to be too far away from the victim.
Despite the efforts of dozens of agents around the country, they discovered no direct leads to Mrs. Heron's whereabouts. But they still resisted contacting the 11 men directly so as not to reveal the investigation. The FBI considered the possibility that the kidnapper might be someone other than the men listed on the note. Agents contacted the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia for assistance. Profilers in the unit are agents trained to determine characteristics of criminals from the details of a case. One profiler reviewed the evidence, particularly the ransom note, looking for indications of the kidnapper's psychological makeup. The profiler called in his findings to the Jackson FBI agents working the Heron kidnapping.
You mind if I put you on speakerphone so we can all listen at one time? Yeah. All right, go ahead.
In the conference call, the profiler confirmed that the kidnapper was likely one of the 11 suspects currently under surveillance.
Which nobody else would ever use. So.
And since all those men had at least some college education, he believed one of them had intentionally misspelled words and used an old typewriter to throw off investigators.
Has a fixation.
The profiler said the abduction was an act of revenge against Robert Heron by a paranoid individual who was willing to kill.
The Behavioral Science Unit believed that a sole perpetrator was responsible for this crime, that it would be a white male of approximate middle age, and that the individual would probably be working alone, although if they were working in concert with someone else, that person would provide a very subordinate role.
It's bad.
The profiler also concluded that by this time, there was only a 50% chance that Annie Heron was still alive. One further detail caught the profiler's eye, a phrase that did not seem to match the rest of the note and might point to the profession of the kidnapper.
The note said, "Pay them whatever damages are owed to them. If any is dead, pay their children." Damages is a legal term. It was telling in that one of the individuals on that demand note was an attorney.
Special Agent Tom Montgomery of the FBI's Jacksonville, Florida office was called in to investigate the attorney listed on the note, a man named N. Alfred Wynn.
After we received the name of N. Alfred Wynn, we did the public record background checks. We also contacted the St. Petersburg Police Department, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, found that he had no criminal record, did our own computer checks also. We determined that he was a St. Petersburg attorney and that he lived above his office.
Yeah. What's this all about?
Well, I'm investigating a crime.
An agent went to interview Wynn at his office residence.
So, Mr. Wynn, you were camping at the girlfriend.
Alfred Wynn said he had nothing to do with the kidnapping and explained where he was on July 26th, the day Mrs. Heron went missing. He had been at a bar with a prostitute. He said that on that evening he had called his paralegal back at the office.
Okay. Hey, thanks.
He asked the employee to meet him at the bar to lend him $100 so he could go home with the prostitute.
We got a deal, sweetheart. All right. It's big time. How about you?
The paralegal promised to be right over. Wynn said he and the prostitute went outside. He stalled for time as he waited for his paralegal to show up with the money. The two were in Wynn's car when his assistant arrived. Wynn took the money, then left with the prostitute. Wynn said he didn't remember much about the evening. He didn't know the name of the bar or the prostitute's real name. The next day, agents checked the alibi with Wynn's paralegal when the attorney was out of the office. He corroborated his boss's story and also claimed that he didn't know the bar's name since he had never been there before or since. Agents suspected both men were lying.
We learned that Wynn had paid for the paralegal schooling at a local community college, his paralegal schooling. We had learned that he was working for basically a very minimum salary, and there was a lot of allegiance between the paralegal and Mr. Wynn.
Later, an agent re-interviewed Wynn's paralegal, explaining their suspicions. He maintained that he had met Wynn at the bar on the same day of the kidnapping, though he did reveal something new about his boss. He said that Wynn's legal battle with the photography company had begun when the company foreclosed on him 7 years earlier, and that he had fought the lawsuit with a vengeance. He had attempted to declare bankruptcy 3 times in order to avoid paying his debts. Under a court order to recover the money, the U.S. Marshal's Office had confiscated Wynn's valuables, including 1,000 shares of expensive stock. They also impounded Wynn's European sports coupe, a car the paralegal said Wynn loved. In addition, they put his St. Petersburg office up for auction. On July 6, 1988, less than 3 weeks before Mrs. Heron disappeared, Wynn had been notified of an eviction hearing. But he had refused to leave. The paralegal said that Wynn had been furious, believing that the photography company had ruined his life.
Going to get that date from me? You're going to check that
The
date?
FBI wondered if the paralegal had been involved in the kidnapping.
Okay. All right, thanks.
We pulled all vehicles registered to the paralegal, friends and associates of Mr. Wynn, to include Mr. Wynn, and learned that the paralegal had a white van registered to him, and through an interview of the paralegal learned that the vehicle was utilized by Wynn on several occasions.
It seemed to be a major breakthrough in the case. The vehicle identification number revealed the name of the previous owner. An agent went to interview her.
You're right, it's just like you said.
He didn't return until...
She said Alfred Wynn, not his paralegal, had been the actual buyer. She said that Wynn had acted strangely. He was adamant that his name not be written on the title. So the woman left the line for the buyer's name blank. The lead was promising, but then agents learned that the van had been in the repair shop on the day of the kidnapping.
Okay, how long was he gone?
It was one more frustration in a difficult case. After more than a week, the FBI and U.S. Attorney James Tucker were no closer to finding Mrs. Heron.
A case like this is extremely difficult when you don't have an eyewitness to any one of several situations. We did not have an eyewitness as to the abduction itself. We did not have an eyewitness that Newton, Alfred Wynn, or any of the other people listed in the particular note had ever been in Mrs. Heron's company.
At the Jackson, Mississippi police station, investigators again met with the doctor who had seen a white van in the Herons' neighborhood.
Go through those and see if there's anybody you recognize.
They hoped he could recognize the driver in a photo lineup.
Short here.
The neighbor quickly picked out the photo of Alfred Wynn.
I'm positive.
He was certain it was Wynn he saw reading a map in a white van across the street from his house in mid-July, less than 2 weeks before Mrs. Herron's abduction. The other neighbor, who had seen a similar van, also identified Wynn as the driver. It was clear to agents that Alfred Wynn was connected to the kidnapping of Annie Laurie Herron, yet they didn't know how.
Thank you very much.
Give me a call if you need it.
We thought, because of the positive identification, that Wynn was definitely somehow involved in the kidnapping. If not the actual perpetrator, if not the man who walked up to the door and actually grabbed Mrs. Herron, he certainly was directing or calling the shots.
Yep.
FBI agents kept Wynn under surveillance. They believed that he could lead them to the missing woman. But as the deadline in the ransom note approached, hopes of finding the frail Mrs. Herron dimmed further. The day after the deadline in a ransom note, FBI agents and local detectives briefed the husband of kidnapped Jackson, Mississippi socialite Annie Laurie Herron in preparation for a televised appeal for his ailing wife's return.
We'll be able to do it.
Okay, thank you.
The note hadn't outlined specific steps to earn Mrs. Herron's release. FBI behavioral profilers hoped the press conference would prompt the kidnapper to contact Mr. Herron with instructions to get his wife back unharmed. With his son and daughter at his side, Robert Herron asked anyone with any information to come forward.
As a businessman,
He also spoke directly to the kidnapper, promising to follow any specific instructions. A week later, the plan seemed to have worked. On August 15th, 1988, Robert Herron spotted the familiar handwriting of his wife among his mail. The envelope was postmarked August 12th from Atlanta, Georgia. Investigators were careful not to destroy any evidence that might have been left on it. Mr. Herron believed the letter was in his wife's handwriting, too. FBI lab examiners later confirmed that it was. In the letter, Mrs. Herron begged her husband to do what the kidnappers wanted, or they would seal her up in a cellar with only a few jugs of water. Though the letter provided no instructions on how to comply, for Special Agent Patrick McGlennon, it did bring new encouragement just when all hope of recovering Mrs. Herron alive seemed lost.
When we received the August 15th letter, which was in Mrs. Herron's handwriting, it really lifted the spirits of everybody that was involved in the case. We felt reasonably sure that she was in good enough condition to write the letter, and we were going to get her back the same way.
The letter itself had been dated August 10th, 15 days after the abduction. Yet no one could be sure Mrs. Herron was alive on that date. It was unclear if she had written the letter on her own, or if the message was coerced, according to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery.
Certain words utilized on the letter, seal me up in the cellar with jugs of water. In talking to family members, we found out that those are not words that she would normally utilize. She would have used the word basement or bottles of water. So it is our belief that the letter was dictated to her.
If the letter had been dictated, both the message and the date could be false. Having to guess at what exactly he should do, Mr. Herron wrote checks to all the men listed in the original ransom note, according to U.S. Attorney James Tucker.
He had already instructed his people to make efforts to determine what financial situations he had had with each of the people that were listed in the original note. So he had some idea at that particular point about how much money had been involved with each of those people.
Mr. Herron settled on restitution, roughly equivalent to the amount the men had been ordered to pay in their franchise lawsuits. The total came to almost $1 million. Herron sent $145,000 to the prime suspect, Alfred Wynn. Enclosed with each check was a note requesting the safe return of his wife. The FBI instructed the Postal Service to deliver the envelopes the next day. Later, agents spoke with Wynn's paralegal and learned of the attorney's reaction to Mr. Herron's check.
When Mr. Wynn received his check in Tampa, Florida, he opened it, read the contents of the letter from Mr. Herron, turned to his paralegal and stated, "This is not what I wanted."
He told his paralegal that what he had wanted was to get his life back, the return of his confiscated car, jewelry, and other property. Wynn sent back the check with a note enclosed, saying he hoped Mrs. Herron would be returned safely. Agents now believe that Alfred Wynn had kidnapped Mrs. Herron for revenge against the photography company Herron once chaired, not for monetary gain. That meant it was less likely Mrs. Herron would ever be returned alive. Although some of the people receiving checks kept the money, most returned similar responses.
Some of the people that Mr. Herron sent these checks to sent the checks immediately back to him, sent letters or called on the telephone, expressing their regret to Mr. Herron that something like this could happen to his wife. They wanted nothing to do with the money, and they weren't going to benefit through his grief.
2.5 months passed without further word from Annie Herron's kidnapper. Considering her fragile health, chances were slim she would survive this long. In early November 1988, the case was featured on a national crime-solving television series. Agents around the country chased each of hundreds of leads called in. One call from a woman in Florida seemed especially promising. Although none of the names on the ransom note had been broadcast, she said that if Alfred Wynn were on the list, she had important information. The FBI learned that the Florida woman was a spiritual advisor, which did not initially bolster confidence among agents.
Special Agent Montgomery from the FBI. We spoke on the phone.
But after a brief interview, they realized she had a strong reputation in the law enforcement field, having often assisted police in the past.
I recognized some of the information that he...
The advisor told an agent she had first met N. Alfred Wynn 4 years earlier. In 1984, he had his first consultation, asking her advice about problems he had with the head of a photography company, the same company mentioned in the Herron ransom note.
She instructed him to pursue his problems through the court system and take legal means, and he told her that he had already done that and it just didn't work.
That's the big problem. That is the biggest
Wynn
problem
said he
of
wanted to
life right
kidnap the head of the company and hold him hostage until he got what he wanted. He had the perfect place to put the man and said that he was looking for someone to help him. He called her a month and a half later to ask if she would help.
Besides, I can go without risking losing these clients. Trying to get new clients.
She declined.
It's tough too,
The advisor provided the FBI with records of her work with Wynn. Once assured agents would protect her, she agreed to become a cooperating witness and promised to contact Wynn to arrange a meeting.
Anything else, or if you want to talk to me, if you want to think of anything at all that might be helpful, please give me a
FBI technicians would wire her office for sound and video.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Our plan was to draw Mr. Wynn into a face-to-face meeting with her and to have them discuss their prior discussions of this kidnapping of Mr. Herron, as well as any of the other things that would verify exactly what he had said to her during their prior meetings.
Alfred Wynn took the bait. The monitored meeting took place in early December 1988. FBI agents watched as Wynn approached the office. Agents hoped he would reveal the whereabouts of the missing woman. The advisor told Wynn she had seen the crime show on television and asked if he had kidnapped Annie Herron.
FBI one, can you hear him in there?
Wynn denied it, adding that he had decided not to abduct Robert Herron as he had previously discussed with the advisor. The recording corroborated the advisor's statement, but it didn't provide agents with the evidence needed to arrest Alfred Wynn. When Wynn left the office, FBI agents followed him.
We hoped a meeting between Mr. Wynn and the psychic would lead him to, at the very least, check on the location of Mrs. Herron's body or lead us to a co-conspirator.
But the suspect never went to visit a place where the body could have been kept. Weeks later, agents learned that Wynn owned a cabin in Florida's swampland, a perfect place to hide a body. Dead or alive, agents hoped they'd find Annie Herron there. They had no way of knowing if the house was booby-trapped or if someone was armed and waiting inside. 6 months after 73-year-old Annie Herron was kidnapped in Mississippi, FBI agents hoped to find her in a remote Florida cabin owned by prime suspect Alfred Wynn. A message from the kidnapper had threatened that the elderly woman would be sealed alive in a cellar. But agents found no cellar. The police was empty of anything related to the kidnapping. FBI Special Agent Patrick McGlennon and other investigators continued searching for the kidnapped woman nearby.
We began to look in dry cisterns, some swamp area adjacent to those properties, the outbuildings, screened porches, whatever structures existed. We found no sign of Mrs. Herron, and no sign that anybody had ever stayed there for any length of time. Certainly no cellars. There were no cellars in that section of Florida.
Annie Herron was still missing and presumed dead. Then, in late July of 1989, Alfred Wynn sent a filing cabinet to the IRS, challenging them to find disputed financial documents.
All right, guys, we got the filing cabinet we could wait on. Win from the IRS. Go ahead, move on that piece. That's good right here.
But he failed to check the cabinet thoroughly, and his arrogance would bring him down.
Wynn, we believe, sent those thousands of documents to Internal Revenue Service as part of an effort to intimidate them into leaving him alone. That was a pattern that the agents discovered in regard to Wynn conduct in a number of situations. His arrogance was demonstrated in his efforts to overpower whoever he was involved with at any particular point.
When they found letters regarding a kidnapping and murder plot, IRS agents called the FBI. The documents outlined how Wynn and a former girlfriend had been planning to kidnap and kill the woman's husband. According to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery, the similarities to Annie Herron's abduction were obvious.
They mentioned utilizing an old typewriter to type a communication, and the first ransom note for Annie Laurie Herron was typed on an old 1920s vintage typewriter. They also mentioned detailed maps, surveillance of the area. They also mentioned that it was actually Wynn that was going to do the crime, and the female was just going to help him and obtain what he needed.
FBI agents tracked down Wynn's ex-girlfriend at the community college where she worked. They needed to question her about the plot outlined in the letters. At first, she claimed she knew nothing about the plot. But when reminded that interfering with an investigation was itself a crime, she decided to cooperate.
The last time you saw him was a few years ago?
She said the plot to kill her husband was Wynn's idea.
Maybe a year, maybe 6 months.
When she realized he was serious, she had broken up with Wynn.
6 months ago. Mailed it from Miami?
Agents asked if she had had any contact with him since then. She said that a year earlier, in early August 1988, Wynn had asked her to meet him at a motel in DeLand, Florida. It was just days after Annie Herron had been kidnapped. Wynn acted paranoid, silently handing her a note that asked if her car was bugged and if she'd been followed. When he was convinced it was safe, he began talking.
What's this all about?
Wynn asked her to mail a letter for him, offering her $500 plus travel expenses.
First of all, do not touch it.
She agreed, and he paid her half in advance, $250.
They're in there. Very, very important.
Wynn handed her an envelope wrapped in a gray linen napkin. Then he gave her very specific instructions. She was not to touch the envelope or even look at the address. Wynn ordered her to mail it from Atlanta, buy the airline tickets under a false name, and fly into and out of 2 different airports. He instructed her to change her appearance before the trip. She complied, changing her clothes, jewelry, and hair in the women's restroom at the airport. Once in Atlanta, she was to mail the envelope precisely on August 11th. But the woman told agents it was late in the day when she made it to a mailbox. At the last moment, she said she couldn't resist a glance at the address. The letter, allegedly sent by Annie Laurie Herron, was postmarked on August 12th from Atlanta.
Have you seen this
Agents
photograph
showed the
before?
woman a photo of the envelope Robert Herron had received. She immediately recognized the distinctive handwriting. It was the envelope she had mailed.
Do you have on this? I'd like to clarify.
She said that she had thrown away the napkin used to carry the envelope on a rural road.
Thank you.
She offered to take them there once she finished work. That evening, she brought the agents to the area. Investigators knew there was little chance they would find the napkin on the roadside after more than a year, but they looked anyway. They needed it to corroborate her story. Against all odds, they found it. But they wanted an admission in Alfred Wynn's own words. With a solid cooperating witness, agents were getting closer to arresting Wynn. At the FBI's request, Wynn's ex-girlfriend agreed to be wired for an audio-taped meeting between herself and Wynn.
We had hoped that Mr. Wynn would discuss facets of the crime, that he would tell her what she had accomplished by sending the letter to the Herron residence, that he would thank her for her help, that he would pay her.
The woman called Wynn and set up a meeting. Agents had instructed her to try to draw Wynn out about the trip to Atlanta.
Fine, but you owe me some.
As hoped,
Yep, that's what I'm
Wynn
here
gave
for.
his ex-girlfriend the $250 he still owed her for mailing the envelope. Wynn refused to talk in detail about his plan, and he never mentioned Annie Laurie Herron.
All right, you did me a favor, all right?
He seemed to have stonewalled investigators again. Convinced he was involved and desperate to find Mrs. Herron, the FBI knew they had to arrest Wynn soon. On March 11th, 1989, the FBI was ready to arrest suspected kidnapper Alfred Wynn. They set up a second meeting with Wynn's former girlfriend who had begun cooperating with authorities. The ex-girlfriend had been wired so agents could record the conversation. They hoped Wynn would say something incriminating about the kidnapping of Annie Herron so they could charge him and recover Mrs. Herron or her body. FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery had coached the informant on how to deal with Wynn in this crucial second meeting.
We had instructed her to become more aggressive in this meeting and to basically indicate to him that she was aware that she was involved in a criminal act, that she'd been watching television, and that she now realized that the letter that she mailed may in fact be involved in the kidnapping, may have been a second ransom note, hoping to elicit from him something to incriminate him further.
Agents watched and listened as the woman pushed Wynn about the Heron kidnapping. The suspect soon became defensive and left the car without admitting any knowledge of the crime.
Pull it out. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Agents knew it was time to make their move. The element of surprise is critical to a safe arrest. Alfred Wynn was charged with conspiracy to kidnap, mailing a threatening communication, and perjury for testifying in front of a grand jury that he wasn't involved in the kidnapping. But agents still had no solid proof that he or an accomplice had in fact abducted Annie Heron. In Wynn's car, agents discovered several maps of Mississippi, one with a Jackson exit marked on it in pen and notes in the margin. Agents thought these might indicate where Mrs. Heron's body had been placed, but extensive searches yielded nothing. Securing a warrant, Florida FBI agents searched Wynn's office. They needed physical evidence to prove Wynn was involved in the abduction of Annie Laurie Heron. Their hopes rose when they spotted a vintage typewriter. Special Agent McGlennon recalled that FBI examiners had determined the ransom note was typed on a 1920s-era Royal typewriter, the exact model recovered from Wynn's office.
This seemed to be a very significant break. In my mind, this was the typewriter upon which Wynn typed the initial demand note that was left in the Heron's home. We sent it to the lab, fully expecting them to come back with a report saying, this is the exact typewriter that composed that letter.
The FBI lab determined that the typewriter found in Wynn's office was not the one used to type the ransom note. Agents believed Wynn had planted a different typewriter to bring doubt to later prosecution. They had also found a business card for a van rental company in Wynn's office.
How you doing?
The company owner said Alfred Wynn had rented white vans 3 times.
I'm the manager. Okay.
Each time he had driven more than 500 miles, just 100 miles more than the round trip to the Heron's residence.
Yes, I do, but I don't have a computer.
The rental times did not coincide with the date of the abduction, but one did match the date when Alfred Wynn was sighted in the Heron's neighborhood. U.S. Attorney James Tucker had little evidence to prove his case. He believed that Wynn and his paralegal were lying about the suspect being with a prostitute on the day of the kidnapping.
We went back and confronted the paralegal with this false alibi. The agents and I had a heart-to-heart talk with him, at which he decided that he better tell us that all that was a lie, and that Mr. Wynn had in fact been out of his law offices and out of pocket during the entire time that the abduction occurred, which would have been the crucial dates, the 24th through about the 28th.
This would help prove perjury, but it wasn't enough to charge Wynn with the crime they were certain he had committed, the kidnapping and murder of Annie Laurie Heron. The federal trial for conspiracy to kidnap began in Mississippi on January 29, 1990.
Throughout the investigation and the 2-week trial, which occurred in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Wynn professed his innocence. But at the conclusion, a jury of his peers found him guilty for the crimes for which he was charged.
N. Alfred Wynn received the maximum sentence allowed: 19 years and 7 months for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He has no chance of parole from the federal prison in Coleman, Florida.
We have never to this day resolved where Mrs. Herron is now, and the family deserves to know that. In fact, as far as this office is concerned, we still carry this as an open matter, and will continue to do so until such time as somebody steps forward and helps us out with locating where Mrs. Herron is. Family deserves it.
Mr. Robert Herron died of a heart attack on November 28, 1990. In May of 1991, Mrs. Annie Laurie Herron was declared dead to allow the settlement of the couple's estate. The Herron family still hopes to someday learn what happened to their mother, to begin to heal their pain, and to finally lay her to rest. Palmyra, a tropical island in the South Seas. For most of the year, it's uninhabited. But by strange coincidence, in June of 1974, 6 sailboats all converged on this tiny island. It should have been Shangri-La, but when bad blood developed, piracy took over, and the only law was the law of the jungle.
A small, uninhabited island almost 1,000 miles from nowhere. It's hard to believe such a paradise really exists. For most sailors on the South Pacific, Palmyra is a stop on the way to somewhere else. But for a few, it's a destination of its own, a place to disappear from the world. That's just what happened to Mac and Muff Graham, although it wasn't their intention. I'm Jim Kellstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. Crime on the high seas falls under the jurisdiction of the FBI. The disappearance of the Grahams and their yacht suggested trouble in paradise. The problem was, there was not a shred of evidence to prove it.
Palmyra Atoll is a series of small islands in the South Pacific, formed by a coral reef which surrounds a lagoon. It is owned by the United States, and during World War II, it housed a U.S. Navy base. The remains of the deserted base are still on the island today. It is located approximately 1,000 miles from Hawaii and is a stopover point for sailors and yachtsmen on their way to Samoa. Oftentimes, large, beautiful sailboats can be seen at the broken-down docks in its lagoon. But on June 26, 1974, a small sailboat named the Iola made its way past the docks and into Palmyra's makeshift harbor. She had just completed a difficult 19-day journey from Hawaii, carrying a crew of 2. The boat was not suitable for the trip, and now limped into the lagoon, barely seaworthy. The ship's motor had frozen up about halfway to Palmyra. Before leaving Hawaii, the owners had repaired the Iola, which was a wooden boat, by covering it with a coat of fiberglass. The friction created by these two materials caused a crack to form in the hull. On the way to Palmyra, the Iola had begun to take on water. They had little money and very few provisions. Their plan was to live off the fruits of the island until later in the year. They had made a deal with some friends to bring supplies to the island, which they would exchange for a crop of marijuana they intended to grow. When they arrived at Palmyra, they were unhappy to see a handful of visitors at the dock area. They had hoped they would have the island to themselves. When they came ashore, they were greeted by a welcoming committee. It wasn't at all what they had expected. They introduced themselves as Stephanie Stearns and Roy Allen, even though the name Buck was tattooed on his right arm in plain view.
What's your name, I'm saying? Roy Allen. Roy? Yeah.
Roy, you got a Buck on your the side there.
When one of the yachtsmen commented on it, Stephanie claimed that Buck was his nickname. Something about Roy was different from the other yachters. He seemed rougher, perhaps even a little dangerous. Shortly after Roy and Stephanie arrived, another boat appeared in the channel, a beautiful 38-foot ketch called the Sea Wind. It wasn't long before the new arrivals made their way over to the dock. Mac Graham was 53 years old. His wife, Eleanor, nicknamed Muff, was a few years younger. Like Roy, they were surprised to find so many people on what was supposed to be an uninhabited island where they planned to spend the better part of a year.
Hi, Stephanie. I'm Mac. Yeah. Hey, Mac. You got any cigarettes? Sure.
When Roy noticed Mac was a smoker, he asked for a cigarette and took most of the pack. This gesture would be considered impolite anywhere, but on an island, it was particularly so, as supplies are limited and can't easily be replaced. For Mac and the others, this was their first insight into the kind of person Roy Allen might be. Roy also boasted about his plans to raise marijuana and trade it for supplies. Soon, everyone began settling into their new life in paradise. Mac Graham began to explore the island, the ruins of the Navy base and the sandy shores.
CQ, CQDX.
And he also made sure to keep in touch with the outside world by shortwave radio.
Everything's fine out here.
At regularly scheduled times, Mac would contact his friend Kurt Shoemaker in Hawaii and tell him about his latest discoveries.
Here's KH6IHG, Hawaii Island, calling and listening. He's just like, Tom Sawyer out in the, on the Mississippi or something. And so he would explain what he did each day. He'd go on excursions, just him, with his machete through the jungle and exploring all the things down there.
For Roy and Stephanie, on the other hand, things weren't going quite as well. Roy found the island was not well suited for growing marijuana. Living aboard the Iola was difficult. The boat was small, damp, cluttered, and cramped. Their supplies were all but gone, and they began to barter their possessions with the owners of the other boats for food and supplies. To the Grahams and the others, Roy and Stephanie were a nuisance. They were not properly supplied to be out on the high seas this far from civilization. The other yachters had enough supplies for themselves, with some extra for emergencies, but not enough to supply Roy and Stephanie. The Grahams were known for their hospitality. They had invited the other visitors to Palmyra aboard the Sea Wind. Others warned them not to allow Roy and Stephanie on their boat. But Mac wanted to make an attempt at being cordial. On July 5th, 2 weeks after the Grahams arrived, and long after everyone else on the island had already had the tour of the Sea Wind, Roy and Stephanie received an invitation to visit. They eagerly accepted.
Oh, the Sea Wind was a real yacht. It was a beautiful-looking boat to begin with, and nice lines, and Mac had kept it in just perfect shape.
It's gorgeous, huh? That's the
Sea Wind was everything the Iola was not. It had a fully stocked larder, and it was equipped with every high-tech navigational device on the market. It had plenty of room, and the Sea Wind had sailed around the world. Stephanie commented on its size and human comforts. She was enchanted by the big bunk in the forward cabin. Roy remained sullen. When Roy began to find the cramped quarters and damp bedding of the Iola too confining, he decided to move into a makeshift tent on the beach. Stephanie would stay aboard the boat. By now, Roy and Stephanie had bartered most of their possessions with the other yachters for food and supplies. Other than trading or flat-out begging, they had little to do with the others. The situation was getting worse by the day. Most of the marijuana seedlings they had counted on for money had been eaten by insects. Although Palmyra has abundant natural resources, including fish, crabs, bird eggs, and coconuts, Roy had little knowledge of how to survive off the land. To catch fish, he would shoot them with his .22 caliber revolver. Like clockwork, Mac continued his weekly radio conversations with Kurt, and he kept him informed about Roy and Stephanie.
Okay. They had moved way down the end of the lagoon and would have nothing to do with the other group. And bizarre things like they started planting marijuana again to see if they could grow it. He needed, I think they were running low on food, so he needed coconuts. He took a chainsaw and cut a coconut tree down to get to the coconuts. That's kind of stupid.
It also infuriated Mac Graham. Mac loved the island and had no tolerance for Roy's destructive ways.
You don't have to do that to get one of these. Why don't you just climb up and get it down?
One day he confronted Roy about it.
I'd ask you for
Roy quickly became angry and told Mac to mind his own business. The hostility between them was building. On July 13th, Muff Graham wrote her mother a letter. She hadn't been enthusiastic about living on an island in the first place, and having Roy and Stephanie there only added to her misgivings. Dearest Mother, 3 boats are here now, but one is leaving and will take this letter with them. That leaves us alone with the hippie couple who plan to stay here and live off the land. It's just our luck they decided to roost in Palmyra. Roy and Stephanie have run out of sugar, cigarettes, and I don't know what. They've bartered with other boats. Next, they will ask us. Muff sent the letter back to civilization with Bernard and Evelyn Leonard, who were leaving Palmyra after a brief stay. The Grahams had previously made arrangements to receive letters over the radio from Kurt Shoemaker, who read them to Mac during their regular weekly shortwave contacts.
During that period of time, I was receiving mail from both of their mothers, his mother and hers. And then I would read this to them. Well, as one of the boats down there would leave, they would take the mail with them and eventually mail it when back in Honolulu or wherever. So there was communication going back and forth. And an interesting thing about it is one of the letters I read, the mother, and I think she was in her 80s, she says that she was afraid for them. She says, you should leave that place, something will happen to you.
One day when Mac was talking to Kurt, he told him that Roy had sent a message with one of the yachts back to his friends in Hawaii. They were supposed to bring Roy and Stephanie's supplies to Palmyra, and he told his friends to reply through Kurt's shortwave radio. Mac asked him if he had heard any news from them, but Kurt had heard nothing. And when Mac talked to him about Roy and Stephanie, there was something about their description that worried him.
And in between these conversations, he had occasionally mentioned the other boat. And I told him, I said, you know, that doesn't sound too good, these people. I said, you know, you better be careful. And he said, well, no, I can take care of myself. I'll be all right. And, so I said, well, I don't know. I think you ought to get out of there myself, or one of you ought to leave.
I don't want to hear it. No, I don't care.
Roy and Stephanie's tempers were running short.
That's why. Look around you.
During the first weeks of August, the sound of angry voices could frequently be heard across the lagoon. The other visitors to the island saw Roy as a violent and quick-tempered man who was dangerous and should be avoided. Then, midway through August, another boat came to Palmyra and spent a few days. Norman Sanders and Thomas Wolfe were on their way to Samoa. The night before they were set to leave, they had cocktails with Mac and Muff. The talk turned to the Iola. Sanders was a sailing expert. He told them he had offered Roy advice about getting the Iola to Samoa. He said he'd suggested Roy and Stephanie should go there, but Roy had just become angry and refused the help. Wolfe cautioned the Grahams that it would be easy for an unsuspecting couple to disappear on a place like Palmyra. In response, Mac opened a drawer and pulled out a .357 Magnum. He assured the others that he could take care of himself. "I'm tougher than he is," Mac said confidently. Wolf and Sanders left Palmyra the next day.
The group of people that were down there, the various boats, one by one, of course, were on their way somewhere, and they, one after another, left.
Visitors had come and gone pretty regularly for the last 2 months, but with the departure of Wolf and Sanders on August 17th, things changed. This was the end of the season when most sailors would be stopping by Palmyra. Mac and Muff Graham were alone on the island with Stephanie and Roy. On August 27th, Mac talked to Kurt Shoemaker. Roy and Stephanie and the Grahams had been alone on Palmyra for 10 days. The tension between Mac and Muff Graham and Roy and Stephanie had increased. Muff knew Roy had a gun and a chainsaw, and at one point he'd been seen with an acetylene torch. This scared her and she wanted off Palmyra, but Mac stubbornly didn't want to leave. The boats had moved to opposite sides of the lagoon and the couples pretty much ignored each other. But then, something unusual happened.
Here is KH6IHG. I was talking to him, and while we're talking, he hears a female voice yelling, saying something, calling to him. And he says, "Oh, what's this company?" So he says, "Hang on a minute, I'll go topside and see." And he says, "I'll be darned. She's coming over in her dinghy, and she says she has a cake for him." And he says, "I guess they're going to declare a truce or something, huh?" That was the words he used. He says, "I better check this out carefully." I said, "Okay." So same schedule next week, same time. So I said, "Be careful now, and see you later." Was it?
1 week later, Shoemaker was at his radio for their regularly scheduled conversation. For the first time since Mac and Muff had left Hawaii, there was no response from the sea wind.
I was concerned about that, and I tried for quite a while, about 20 minutes to half an hour, trying to make contact. So the next contact was a couple of days later, and then I tried again, nothing. And then for the next few weeks, I tried, intermittently from time to time. And then it was at that point that I decided something happened.
Unable to convince the authorities that something had gone wrong on Palmyra, Shoemaker had a friend fly over the island. The aerial survey seemed to confirm his worst fears. Palmyra was deserted. There were no boats in the harbor, no Iola, no sea wind, and there was no sign of life.
Well, I had a feeling all that time that something had happened. The boat had been taken over. I was very strong feelings about that, simply because of all of the incidents that they related to me and he related. And I mean, it just pointed to that one thing, but I couldn't convince anyone that that was a problem.
Shoemaker did have one resource available to him, the radio. Having no idea where they had gone, he spread the word to yachtsmen in the Pacific to be on the lookout for the sea wind. But days, weeks, and then months passed with no word about the fate of Mac and Muff Graham or the sea wind. 2 months after the last communication with the Grahams, Bernard and Evelyn Leonard, who had been given the last written message from the Grahams, were at the Alawai Yacht Harbor in Hawaii. Bernard noticed a 38-foot ketch with very distinctive lines.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, then it had to.
It had been repainted, but Bernard was certain it was the sea wind. He also recognized a familiar figure on deck, Roy Allen. Knowing the tensions that had existed between the Grahams and Roy and Stephanie, and also knowing that the Grahams had not been heard from in some time, Leonard immediately called the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard had been aware of the missing sea wind.
Yes,
when Leonard explained that the owners were not on the boat, the Coast Guard officers felt this might lead to something outside of their jurisdiction. They called the FBI. The call was answered by Special Agent Calvin Shishido, who worked out of the FBI's Hawaii field office.
My assignment there was just a general mix of general criminal investigations, security investigations, backgrounds. It was such a small office that we couldn't specialize. We had to handle everything that came at us.
Shishido agreed to meet the Coast Guard and the Leonards at the marina, although what he heard was not conclusive enough to warrant FBI involvement. Perhaps the owners were on shore, or perhaps they had sold the boat. Perhaps it wasn't even the Sea Wind. After arriving moments later, the Leonards showed him the yacht in question. There seemed to be no one aboard.
So he pointed out the areas where there was an attempt to disguise the boat. You know, it had been repainted, the gunnels had been repainted, the nameplate was taken off, it was removed and painted over. And other things that he pointed out to show that it was actually the Sea Wind. He knew it was the Sea Wind.
Although there was still no direct evidence of foul play, Shishido was growing suspicious. There was no visible activity on the boat, so Shishido instructed the Coast Guard officers to post a lookout. The lookout spotted Roy and Stephanie the next morning, rowing from the floating dock towards shore in a little dinghy. He immediately alerted the Coast Guard, who in turn called Special Agent Shishido. But another boat owner hailed Stephanie and Roy and told them that the Coast Guard had been looking around their boat the day before. Roy noticed a Coast Guard patrol boat in the marina that seemed to be moving towards them. Roy quickly changed direction and headed for the nearest dock. After letting Roy off, Stephanie started to row back to the Sea Wind. Two plainclothes policemen were approaching Roy when he spotted them. Without hesitating, he turned and dove off the end of the dock and began to swim away. The officers found a wallet on the dock.
And in it was the identification of this Roy Allen, and it had a photograph. And I believe Mr. Leonard looked at the picture and said that was Roy Allen.
Meanwhile, the Coast Guard boat had spotted Stephanie in the rowboat and began to give chase. She turned and started to row towards shore, hoping to reach the dock before they caught up with her. When she reached the dock, she jumped out and began to run, but there was nowhere for her to go. The patrol boat was right behind, with Bernard Leonard aboard. He and a Coast Guardsman followed her. They saw her dart into a hotel stairwell. They found her hiding behind a potted palm. She immediately recognized Leonard from Palmyra.
Come with us.
As the Coast Guard officer took her into custody, one question was foremost on Leonard's mind. What had happened to the Grahams? Stephanie Stearns was taken to the Coast Guard offices for questioning. On the way there, Bernard Leonard and Stephanie found themselves alone in the rowboat. When he asked if Mac and Muff were still alive, she shook her head. Mac and Muff, she told him, had apparently drowned. At least, they never found their bodies. Leonard was incredulous. How could that have happened? Stephanie explained that she and Roy had been invited to the Sea Wind for dinner, but the Grahams never showed up. The next morning, she and Roy found the Grahams' overturned inflatable Zodiac boat washed up on shore in the shark-infested lagoon. After searching fruitlessly for the bodies, they decided to take their own boat back to Hawaii. But it got hung up on the reef, so they went back and took the abandoned Sea Wind. Leonard listened to Stephanie, but he didn't believe her story.
As I remember it,
In the Coast Guard offices, she started telling her story again, this time to Special Agent Shishido in the Coast Guard.
At any time. Okay.
This is the way it happened. This is the way I'm telling it to you.
Details then of what happened to them.
At one point, I remember speaking to her. She kept going on, and I kept reminding her that she had the right to remain silent and that anything she said could be used against her in a court of law. And she would just keep on talking.
Stephanie told him she had arrived at the Sea Wind with Roy just about in time for dinner. The boat was strangely quiet. They called out, but no one answered.
Hello? Hello? Mac? Ma? Hello?
They went below and continued their search, but got no reply.
I can't find anybody down here.
They're not here.
Didn't she say they were going to meet us here?
Yeah, they knew we were coming for dinner.
They assumed the Grahams had gone out fishing for dinner and made themselves at home till they returned.
There's nobody here.
According to Stephanie, the Grahams never showed up, so they both decided to spend the night on the Sea Wind.
All right.
They believed the Grahams would show up any time. But the next morning, when the Grahams hadn't returned, she said they became very worried and went out to look for Muff and Mac as soon as it was light. But all they found was the Grahams' overturned Zodiac washed up on shore and a can full of gasoline. They turned the inflated boat over and started the motor. Then she said they spent the next 2 days searching for the Grahams or any sign of what might have happened to them. But they found nothing. The Grahams had simply vanished. Shishido found her story implausible.
Together, and we went over there.
When she explained how they had taken possession of the Sea Wind, her story was quite different from the one she had just told Leonard.
No one would have believed us. They would have taken
This
the
time,
boat.
she said they had left Palmyra aboard the Sea Wind, towing the Iola, which got caught up on a reef and sank.
And all we found
Stephanie was tripping over her first lie.
But I knew there were at least, two conflicting stories as to how they got in possession of the boat. At this point, we became very worried about the Graham's condition. We didn't know what had happened to them, and we certainly was not going to get any real true information from Stephanie Stearns.
But
the FBI has jurisdiction over crime on the high seas. Shishido determined he had enough evidence to arrest Stephanie Stearns for interstate transportation of stolen property. Then his attention turned to Stephanie's boyfriend, Roy Allen, who had evaded the police at the marina and was still at large. Shishido checked, and there was no record of a Roy Allen, but he had the wallet with Roy Allen's picture. Bernard Leonard also told Shishido that Roy had taken marijuana plants to Palmyra and had intended to grow them to sell. Drugs and a photograph of Roy gave him a starting place.
But I suspected that people with, traveling on the Iola, which is not really a seaworthy boat, going around and planting marijuana on the islands and so on, must be involved in drug running.
Hi, Cal. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. What can I do for you today?
Shishido took the photograph to the Drug Enforcement Agency and showed it to several of the agents.
So we would like to get further information on here.
They were surprised when they looked at the picture.
Let me get into it.
They told him that it was Buck Walker and that they had been looking for him.
I'll get back to you on that. Have a good day.
Same to you.
All right.
And so we got all the background data on Buck Walker, and that's when our search for Buck Walker began. And now we're looking for Buck Walker instead of Roy Allen.
Buck Dwayne Walker was a convicted felon and a fugitive. He'd been awaiting sentencing on a drug conviction when he and Stephanie fled Hawaii on the Iola headed for Palmyra. As the search for Walker began with a new urgency, Shishido was also concerned about the Grahams. He knew Stephanie was lying and changing details about what had happened on Palmyra. He didn't trust her story about the fate of the Grahams. There was always the possibility that the Grahams were alive and stranded on the island. Shishido made arrangements for himself and some other agents to travel to Palmyra to see if they could find them.
We decided to go to Palmyra to see if maybe the Grahams were stranded there, you know, in need of food, and or they could have been tied up for all we know, and you know, immobile, and their lives were in danger. So we decided to go out there to look around, and we did.
On the island, they found the remains of the camp Buck Walker had abandoned. They took photographs and examined the site thoroughly. A search of the island produced no sign of the Grahams. However, Shishido did make a couple of curious discoveries.
I remember picking up a hatch cover, and of course later it was identified as a hatch cover coming off of the Iola.
The hatch cover was important because no seaman would leave for high waters without his hatch cover. Without it, the boat could take on water, which would cause it to sink. This told Shishido that Roy and Stephanie had intended to scuttle the Iola. Using these clues, Shishido began to develop his theory as to what happened to the Grahams.
My thinking was that they had tied the couple up and put them on the Iola and sank the Iola. And that was the only explanation we had, because we couldn't find the Iola, and there was no way the Iola could be in Hawaii, because they certainly wouldn't be sailing the Seawind and the Iola by themselves.
Shishido found something at an old Navy warehouse that piqued his interest.
I think one of the things, too, that I noticed was that in an old workshop or warehouse, there was an old air rescue boat or sea rescue boat, and it had place for 3 containers where they put provisions. And of the 3, 2 receptacle areas were, you know, the cans were missing, and the 3rd was still left there. And of course, now we're looking for 2 people. In my mind, you know, suspiciously thought that these 2 cans, because, you know, it was large enough that they could have been, you know, containing the remains of the couple.
Meanwhile, the search for Buck Walker continued. On November 8th, 1974, after spending 10 days hiding out on the lava flows on the big island of Hawaii, Buck resurfaced in a tiny hamlet off the beaten track. He rented a room and went to a restaurant for a drink. At the same moment, across the street, 2 uniformed officers were eating lunch. As they paid the bill, they showed their waitress a picture of Buck Walker. She said he'd just been in the restaurant looking for a drink, and she'd sent him to a bar across the street. The officers spotted him and contacted the FBI. Buck was arrested on a fugitive charge. He was read his rights and handcuffed without a struggle.
FBI, you're under arrest. Put your
Under
hands on
questioning, Buck revealed nothing that could help the investigation. He answered questions with a frank yes or no, or with stone silence. The investigators couldn't find even the slightest piece of information that could help them find the Grahams.
Right arm.
While Stephanie was in prison awaiting trial, Shishido found more proof Stephanie and Buck were lying.
While she was at prison, we found out that she had some photographs developed. So when the photographs were developed and brought back to prison, we seized the photographs and examined them. Among the photographs showed that the Seawind, or Stephanie Stearns, was on the Seawind taking a photograph of the Iola under full sail with Buck Walker on board the Iola. So we knew that at one point Stephanie was on the Seawind and Buck Walker by himself on the Iola.
This was different than the stories both Buck and Stephanie told officials. Shishido was convinced that the Grahams had been murdered. But without any bodies and no hard evidence, the U.S. attorney assigned to prosecute the case did not believe they could make a homicide charge stand up in court.
We could, but it's strictly circumstantial, and we might not win the case. And if we lose the case, and later, years later, if the body should pop up and we get some real good evidence as to murder on the part of the Buck Walker and Stephanie Stearns, he said we couldn't try them again. So I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Buck Walker and Stephanie Stearns were charged with interstate transportation of stolen property. It was an open and shut case. Buck and Stephanie had been caught with possession of the Seawind in Hawaii and had made numerous attempts to change its appearance. Buck had registered it under his name as a homemade boat. Buck and Stephanie were both found guilty. Buck Walker received 10 years for his previous drug conviction and 5 years for theft of the Seawind. Stephanie Stearns received 2 years for her role in the boat theft. But Shishido was still convinced the couple had killed Mac and Muff Graham, and that somewhere on or around Palmyra was the evidence to prove it. He could only hope that someday it might surface, and then he could charge Buck and Stephanie with murder. On January 21st, 1981, a young South African couple, Robert and Sharon Jordan, were visiting Palmyra. Almost 7 years had passed since Mac and Muff Graham disappeared. That afternoon, Sharon went for a walk down the beach and made a startling discovery. Washed up on the shore was an aluminum canister, and beside it, she found human bones and a skull. Around one of the bones was a wristwatch. She had heard the story of Mac and Muff Graham and immediately contacted the Coast Guard. Cal Shishido was catching up on paperwork when he overheard part of a phone conversation.
Human bones? Palmyra?
First he heard the words human bones, and then Palmyra. Where's Palmyra? The agent was new and had never heard of the case. Shishido was on his feet immediately. Who was on the phone, he asked. The agent told him it was the Coast Guard. Shishido quickly took the phone and told the Coast Guard to ask the couple who had discovered the bones to stay on the island and wait for them.
When I first heard that, of course, I was really excited because I thought, whoa, somebody found some bones on Palmyra, and it had to be the Grahams, and I thought, this is it.
Shishido and a team of investigators flew to Palmyra to examine the new findings. If the bones Sharon Jordan found belonged to either one of the Grahams, the FBI might be able to establish the cause of death. Shishido was shown the gruesome discovery: a skull, human bones, a wristwatch, and some wire, all lying next to an open metal box, identical to the kind Shishido noticed in the rescue boats on his previous visit to the island. He speculated that the wire had been wrapped around the case and had somehow come loose. Then when the case came ashore, it had opened and the bones had spilled out. Since a second container had been missing from the Navy rescue boat, Shishido felt the other victim might still be inside. Divers were sent to search the surrounding waters, looking for a container like the one found on the beach. But in the shark-infested waters, the divers found nothing. When Shishido got back to Honolulu, he sent the container, wire, skull, and bones to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C. for examination. The skull belonged to a Caucasian woman in her late 40s or early 50s. Dental records showed that it was Muff Graham's. The skull also had signs of charring around the left eye socket and a hole in the left temple. The FBI concluded that the contour of the hole was consistent with a gunshot wound, but due to the age of the wound, could not say conclusively that it was caused by a bullet. The aluminum box was examined by the FBI Elemental Analysis Unit. They found evidence of charring on the outside of the box. Next, the FBI needed to determine if the skeleton had been in the box. They cut out a rectangular section and subjected it to a battery of tests. The rectangular piece of metal was found to contain traces of human protein, conclusive proof that the box had once held a body.
The FBI did a tremendous job as far as the container was concerned, because they came back with a report that indicated that there were human remains in the container, that the remains had been burned, and that while it was in flame, the container was in about 2 inches of water. And they found traces of human protein, human fabric in the container and everything, to indicate that a human body was disposed of in the container by flame.
As Shishido had suspected, Muff Graham had not simply drowned, she had been murdered. The FBI now believed it had enough evidence to prosecute Buck and Stephanie for the murder of Muff Graham. Having served her jail term for the theft of the Seawind, Stephanie now had a white-collar job in California. She was arrested and taken into custody. Buck Walker was still serving time in prison, or so Shishido thought.
When I sent our agents in the state of Washington a lead to put a detainer on Buck Walker, I found out that he was an escapee. And so I thought, oh no, not again. You know, are we going to have to do this search all over for him? We found that there was only one woman that had visited him, and that she had visited him the day before his escape.
The trace was placed on the woman, which led them to her car, parked in a motel in Yuma, Nevada. The FBI was notified and set up a stakeout. When Buck and another man came out of the motel and approached the car, the FBI moved in. He was considered an armed and dangerous fugitive, wanted both for murder and jailbreak. On the front seat of the car, they found barbiturates and several thousands of dollars in cash. Buck Walker was arrested and charged with the murder of Muff Graham. Stephanie Stearns was also arrested and charged with the same crime, though they would be tried separately. Because of the publicity the story had generated in Hawaii, the trials were moved to San Francisco. Both cases were assigned to federal prosecutor Elliot Inoki. The motive for the crime was never in doubt.
The motive was they were without a seaworthy vessel. The only other couple on the island was leaving shortly. They were running out of food, and they didn't know when any other vessel would get there, if at all, because this was becoming the end of the so-called season when you could expect people to visit the island. So you had people running out of food and provisions with an inability to get anywhere.
Inoki knew he could show Buck and Stephanie had opportunity and motive to kill the Grahams. But first he had to prove in court that Muff Graham was murdered. He also needed to completely discredit Buck and Stephanie's story that the Grahams had drowned. As Inoki began constructing his theory of the case, Shishido was busy putting holes in Buck and Stephanie's defense. The FBI had already found evidence of human protein on the sides of the aluminum box. But since the bones were found next to it, Inoki wanted additional proof that the body had actually been in the box. Therefore, ruling out the possibility of Muff drowning as Buck and Stephanie had claimed, he contacted San Francisco's chief medical examiner, Boyd Stevens.
Finding the skeleton together is supportive that Miss Graham was in that box and therefore held together. It's not possible for me to really say that she couldn't have stayed together if she had been out of the box. However, the problems that would be required is that the skeleton has to stay together even after it's disarticulated. And that's an extremely strong argument that that could not have occurred if she had died and just been laying on the lagoon bottom. The second is that the skeleton has to come ashore together, and that's just not really possible.
Shishido also decided to test Buck and Stephanie's story that the Graham's dinghy, the Zodiac, had been found overturned.
Of course, later investigation showed that if the boat had capsized the way they said they found it, the outboard motor would have been inoperable because of the salt water going into the engine itself. And of course, we made a test to find out whether the Zodiac could actually tip over accidentally, and we tried to force it to turn upside down, banging into things with 3 or 4 men sitting on one edge of the boat, and it just wouldn't tip over.
Inoki also asked medical examiner Boyd Stevens to examine Muff Graham's skull in order to corroborate the FBI's findings that Muff had been murdered. Inoki knew that having 2 highly respected sources would strengthen his case. Stevens found flat abrasions to the skull, consistent with prolonged confinement in a box, such as the aluminum container.
The key issues for us was the flattening of the skull, which represents that it had been placed against a hard, flat surface, primarily across the left side of the face. And what I'm pointing to is the nose, the eye sockets, and what would be the cheek and life, and of course the teeth. One of the things that was evident about the skull of Miss Graham is that this whole area about the face had been planed down so that it was a flat surface. And if you can imagine, if I take this skull and put it across a flat surface, and let's just say this table is coated with sandpaper, and I work it back and forth for a period of time, eventually I would shave it down till it was a flat surface. There was a second plane showing that the skull had changed position and again had been exposed to a flat surface with motion for a long period of time. We used that as an argument that the skull had been within the box and moving. If the body had been buried in the coral sand, then it would not be a change that we would expect to see. And coffin wear is not seen if somebody's buried in dirt or in coral. It's seen if they're in a hard surface container.
There were minimal animal bite marks and insects on the skull, which were consistent with remains that had only been exposed to the surface life for a short period of time, presumably the time after the box had surfaced and opened. But what about the charring on the skull in the metal box? Did this show an attempt to destroy the body?
One of the questions we had been asked is whether we could prove that the skull had been burned with an acetylene torch.
People who were at Palmyra when Buck and Stephanie were there saw Buck with an acetylene torch. The FBI believed this is what caused the burns to the skull. If Inoki could have Stevens corroborate this, he could further implicate Walker.
If a person is exposed to a flame, there may be burning of the outer portions of the skin, but until the water is evaporated, the tissue can't burn. And it takes a heat period to boil the water off or evaporate it before the tissue can actually burn. Acetylene torches, of course, run fairly hot, and they would do that process fairly rapidly.
The marks on the skull clearly showed the use of an extreme source of heat. Further evidence that Muff had been murdered. The forensic evidence overwhelmingly proved that Muff Graham had been murdered. A trial date was set. A trial involving people who live on the high seas presents some unique challenges. The FBI had to subpoena about 40 witnesses and then make sure they were in San Francisco at the time of the trial. Special Agent Hal Marshall was assigned to the case.
I first became involved when I transferred to Honolulu in 1981 from Los Angeles. Witnesses were flying in from all over the world, literally. Sharon Jordan and her husband and 2 children came in twice from South Africa. And one of the hard situations was a lot of these people were boating people who did not keep in touch. Last we heard of some of them, they were in a bay in Hawaii in a boat with no fixed address. So it was a matter of getting them to San Francisco, sometime having to wait 2 or 3 days, sometime postponing it. Weather conditions and things like that that required us to be sure they were there when we needed them. And luckily, everybody showed up that needed to show up, and everything went smooth.
There were only 2 possible suspects, and Buck had an extensive criminal record. But did Buck commit the murder alone, or was Stephanie also involved? She was the last person known to have contact with the Grahams on the day she brought them a cake. Elliot Inoki believes Stephanie had one strong advantage on her side.
Well, she had one option. She could blame Walker. And although she didn't directly do that, her attorney certainly did in the way the case was argued and presented. That gave her a very big option that Walker simply did not have, or if he had, it was a much more difficult sell because of the circumstances and the personalities involved. He's the one with the prior record, much bigger than she is. The testimony about him shooting fish with his gun. I mean, he had a lot of things on his side of the ledger that were not on her side of the ledger. One of the other substantial differences is that Stephanie testified in the case. Walker did not, and so she directly refuted any claim of knowledge or involvement in any kind of homicide. But certainly, through her testimony, left a large room for her attorney to argue that Mr. Walker had the opportunity and the means to commit a murder.
A jury found Buck Walker guilty after only a few hours of deliberations, and he received a sentence of life in prison. Stephanie Stearns was defended by famed attorney Vincent Bugliosi, who was convinced of her innocence. She was acquitted of all charges when he convinced a jury that Buck not only acted alone, but sought to conceal the crime from his girlfriend. We may never know what really happened on Palmyra on that day in late August, though the forensic evidence paints a grisly picture.
Well, empirically, I believe that that Miss Graham was killed exactly as the charge was made, and that is that she was shot, that there was an attempt to burn her body, that her extremities were probably fractured to get her into the box, and that she was cast into the ocean and then eventually came adrift. And I think that that probably happened to the husband as well.
Matt Graham's body has never been found, although investigators believe there's a very high likelihood that he's in the other box. In 1989, residents of a close-knit apartment community in Virginia gathered for a holiday celebration. For Tammy Brannon and 5-year-old daughter Melissa, Christmas was always a special time. Then, without warning, the little girl was gone. Her disappearance ignited an impassioned search. Law enforcement and the local community spared no effort. But would they piece together the evidence and find her before it was too late?
In 1989, in front of close to 200 witnesses, a child disappeared. 5-year-old Melissa Brennan vanished from a Christmas party at her mother's apartment complex in Virginia. Children have a way of wandering off, but it soon became clear this was more than a case of a lost child. Someone had taken Melissa. What sorrow compares to a mother's grief? What kind of monster preys on children? I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. The hunt for Melissa galvanized the community as a nation held its breath and waited for word. All victims deserve justice. All criminals must be punished. But when a crime involves a child, the stakes become so much greater.
On December 3rd, 1989, the Woodside apartment complex in Lorton, Virginia held its Yuletide Christmas party.
How's he doing?
The Woodside was a large but friendly complex, a community that revolved around family life and children's activities. The kids were always excited about the party, which meant special treats and presents. A single mom, Tammy Brannon, had found in the Woodside complex a safe community in which to raise her only child, Melissa. As the evening wound down, Tammy stopped to visit with a friend before going home.
We'll have some pizza. How about that? Okay?
Can I go get some potato chips?
Okay, we'll come right back.
Okay.
I'm instructing down at Ocean. Really? Mm-hmm. Good for you. Yeah. Did you? We gotta get ready. Okay. We have a lot to do. She's getting so big. So cute. She is. Did you see where she went?
She lost sight of her daughter for only a few seconds. But that was long enough for a mother's worst nightmare to begin.
Can you see my daughter? Melissa? Melissa? Melissa!
Melissa disappeared. The Fairfax County, Virginia Police Department was called immediately.
Now, I'm going to do everything I can to find your little girl, but you have to tell me everything you can possibly.
Detective Bill Wilden assured Tammy they would do all they could to find her little girl. The detectives began questioning the people at the party. No one could recall seeing Melissa leave the party or anywhere near the front door.
I'm Detective Wilden. This is Rappaport with the
Richard Rappaport, the Fairfax Department's search commander, joined Detective Wilden to organize the search party.
If you come across anything suspicious, an article
He would
or
head up
clothing,
the
please notify me.
investigation.
Does everyone understand?
One of the possibilities,
cold
of
out
course, was that she had just hidden somewhere in the building, was playing with some friends, or had wandered off. So immediately the patrol officers on the scene did a very good job of searching the building, and they began a search of the immediate area surrounding the building. The night of December 3rd was a bitterly cold night in the Washington area. Someone outside that was 5 years old without a lot of protection probably would not have survived through the night. It was that cold.
All the adults that can participate, I need you outside with flashlights.
Rappaport coordinated a more specific grid search of the area with patrol officers and dozens of volunteers from the complex.
Let's go.
The search effort began. Nearly 100 neighbors, police, and Army personnel from nearby Fort Belvoir combed the woods around the complex. Most were parents themselves, united by a single concern: to find Melissa. Like the detectives, they expected to find a shivering and frightened little girl lost in the dark woods and crying for her mother. Officers began to question the 200 people who had attended the party and interview over 400 other Woodside residents. Though the complex was large, many residents knew Melissa and knew her to be very shy. Shocked to hear that she had disappeared, almost all expressed doubt that she would ever have gone off without her mother, and certainly not with a stranger. Detective Wilden went with Tammy to her apartment to interview her. He questioned her extensively about her past and possible troubles with her neighbors or employer. An accountant, she had never had any problems with anyone. Tammy had lived at Woodside for over 3 years since her divorce from her husband in Texas. She had experienced the normal readjustments of a newly single mom, but she and her ex-husband were on good terms. When detectives discovered an open window in the furnace room, Jim Gogan, the crime scene investigator for the Fairfax County Police Department, was asked to examine it.
The way the door was set up, everybody had to either go
through the crowd to get out the front of the building. That was only the main door and the only door available to get out, with the exception of the hallway down to the bathrooms and the furnace room. They had large windows, and in the furnace room itself had a window, what was discovered open. And from there, the assumption was made that possibly that's how she was taken from the building.
Melissa's disappearance was suddenly far more complicated. The search for a missing child had become a possible abduction case.
Did you see her leave the party at any time?
The police continued their questioning with even greater urgency and began to hear repeated mention of the strange, even bizarre behavior of the maintenance man for the complex.
That was the last I saw.
What was his height?
Several of the women reported how offended they were by extremely vulgar sexual propositions made to them by Caleb Hughes.
There was a possibility that if she had been abducted for sexual purposes that she might be molested, but we were very, very hopeful that we could at least find her alive before her life was in jeopardy.
Now that they were dealing with a possible abduction case, detectives returned to Tammy's apartment and collected nightgowns, hairbrushes, and bedclothes, any items bearing traces of Melissa.
Can you describe?
As detectives continued questioning the people at the party, they learned more disturbing details about Hughes' behavior that night. He had spent what seemed to many to be an unusual amount of time playing games with the children. He made the parents uneasy by touching the kids. There was something unsettling, something indecent about him.
At the party, he was not dressed as well as the rest of the people. He wore his work clothes. He mingled with some of the people he knew at the party, and he spent some time talking with Melissa's mother, making comments about Melissa, and offered to take Melissa and a couple of the other children to the restroom if they needed to go. He just had some very suspicious behavior from a man of his age around the children.
With growing suspicion, the detectives tried repeatedly to reach Hughes by phone, and then went to his house, but were told by his wife that she had no idea where he might be.
Were you playing with her tonight?
He had left the party sometime before our arrival there. He lived only 4 miles away, but it took us several hours for us to contact him because he had not yet returned home.
Finally, 2.5 hours after Melissa's disappearance, Caleb Hughes called the police, who then returned to his house. Upon questioning, he claimed he had simply taken the long way home. The officers immediately noticed he was wearing different clothing from that reported by witnesses at the party.
I washed clothes tonight when I got home. They're in the wash machine over there.
In the washing machine, they found the clothes Hughes had been wearing, as well as his sneakers and a leather belt with a knife sheath. The knife was missing.
You washed your shoes at 2 a.m. in the morning?
Yeah.
He'd been gone for several hours, and to come home in the middle of the night when your family was asleep and to feel the immediate need to wash everything you had been wearing, including your shoes, we found that rather suspicious behavior, and that just further added to our interest in his whereabouts.
As Hughes appeared reluctant to speak in front of his wife, the officers decided to take him to headquarters for further questioning. Suspecting that Hughes might be covering for time spent with a girlfriend, the officers wanted to allow him the opportunity to tell the real story.
Do you know Melissa Brannon?
No, I do not.
To the detective's surprise, there was no real story. Hughes had no alibi. He claimed he had no idea who Melissa was, that he had driven the long way home
Why were you
alone
washing your
after
shoes?
picking up a six-pack, and then had simply washed his clothes.
You normally wash your shoes with your clothes?
Sometimes, yeah.
What were they dirty with?
He said as an excuse that they were his only work clothes and he had to be to work the next day and they were dirty, so he needed to clean them for work.
Look, am I being charged with anything?
Despite hours of intense questioning, Hughes remained
not right
smug
now.
and evasive.
I'm free to go.
Finally,
Yeah, you're free to
Detective
go.
Wilden told him he was free to go,
But I know you're
though he
guilty.
was almost certain Hughes was lying.
Well, you're gonna have to prove it then, aren't you?
As far as the Fairfax County Police Department was concerned, Caleb Hughes was the prime suspect. Believing Caleb Hughes was involved in Melissa's disappearance, Detective Bill Wilden contacted Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney Robert Horan.
It was a suspected homicide, certainly by then. He made some statements that were out of character for somebody who really is a suspect in a crime of this nature. You would normally think the minute somebody would suggest you or I have abducted a 5-year-old child, I mean, you would think it would be the most vigorous, vehement outburst. Of course I didn't. Well, they got nothing like that. Matter of fact, at one point he said to Wilden, "Prove it," which is again an unusual reaction for somebody who had nothing to do with it.
Gauguin had photocopied Melissa's picture and printed hundreds of flyers to help in the search.
And as the sun came up, the search expanded into further down south on the highway. They sent soldiers out to do massive searches through the woods, along the railroad tracks, and as possible ideas of locations where she might have been were developed, again, hundreds of people were gathered to search and walk those areas.
The car Hughes had been driving that night belonged to his wife. She gave investigators permission to impound and search it. Detectives examined it for fingerprints, blood, fibers, hair, any evidence that would document Melissa's presence there. Fingerprint tests revealed that only the Hughes family had left prints on the car. Next, all the hairs and fibers needed to be collected from the interior. This type of trace evidence was usually retrieved with a vacuum cleaner, but there was simply too much debris inside.
When I first approached the car and looked inside, I just kind of went, whoa. They had 2 large dogs, the Hughes. They carried them a lot in that car. It was just cluttered with dirt and debris and just a mess inside that car. And I just kind of shook my head like this was going to be a real challenge. So I decided to use the masking tape as an alternative to the vacuum cleaner, just hoping to just get what was on the surface.
That was an unusual technique, certainly. In my years, that was the first time I ever had run into it in the Fairfax Police Department. And it's a very common technique now.
Gauguin then placed the tape between layers of clear plastic so that it could be examined intact under a microscope. As the car processing continued, Melissa's disappearance quickly became the lead news story in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area.
Melissa Brannon is 3 feet tall, 48 pounds, with blue eyes and dark blonde, shoulder-length hair. She was last seen wearing a pink ski jacket, red plaid skirt, and black shoes with gold buckles.
The night of the party, Melissa had been wearing a navy blue acrylic sweater with a Sesame Street Big Bird picture, red tights, a red cotton plaid skirt, and a pink parka.
When I found the red blue fibers that were visible on the tape, I did kind of get excited about that. But at the time I was excited but worried because we needed to find her to identify the clothes, the possible clothes. Without Melissa, that was going to be real tough.
When Gauguin conducted luminol testing on the interior of Hughes's car, he found traces of blood on the steering wheel, brake pedal, and floor mat. When a light is shined on the luminol-treated area, bloodstains will appear fluorescent. While the luminol process is quite accurate as a blood locator, it can also destroy the genetic characteristics of the sample.
When I sprayed the steering wheel, I got the reaction on the steering wheel and as well as on the pedals of the vehicle. That's where it fell to. These items were swabbed and collected.
Hughes's shoes had been washed, but the lab was able to identify possible blood stains on their soles where fresh cuts had been made.
It became very suspicious when I received the clothes from the officers who searched the house and noticed that he had cut his tennis shoes. Kind of putting two and two together, that why was he cutting his tennis shoes and why did I get a reaction to blood on the gas pedals?
Surely Caleb Hughes had tried to cover his tracks to avoid a link to an unimaginable crime.
What is your name?
Caleb Hughes.
How old are you?
With the luminol findings showing blood in his car, the detectives were increasingly confident they could get a confession from Hughes. He was brought in for a polygraph test. He had no explanations for the fresh cuts on his shoes.
No.
Once again, he gave no explanation for the 2-hour, 30-minute delay in getting home.
But as it turned out, there never was an explanation. He said, I just took the long way home. It was the best they got.
Did you harm Melissa Brannon?
No.
Did you kill Melissa Brannon?
No.
These are proven to be deceptive.
When Hughes denied outright that he had killed Melissa, polygraph examiner Rick Danielle was sure he was lying.
He really denied ever having seen this child, denied knowing who the child was. He was showing pictures of her, never seen that child before. And of course the police knew that was not true because he had been at the same table with the child, had talked to the child.
You got the wrong guy.
I'm asking you about what you did.
You got the wrong guy.
Danielle was absolutely satisfied he was hiding something, that he was lying about something.
So close to getting you.
I'm out of
So
here.
close.
He was attempting to deceive him. But of course, none of that under Virginia law, as you may know, none of that's evidence. You're not allowed to use it at trial.
Investigators were convinced Hughes had abducted and harmed the beautiful little girl. But Tammy Brannon tried to keep her hope alive, fighting her worst fears. Melissa's Christmas presents waited under the tree.
News 7 has confirmed tonight that the investigation into the disappearance of 5-year-old Melissa Brannon appears to be focusing on one primary suspect. Police will continue their search efforts and to pursue leads. There is now a $10,000 reward for any information concerning Melissa's whereabouts.
For Tammy Brannon and her parents, the hours passed in an agonizing wait for more information. Melissa's disappearance electrified the tiny rural community of Lorton, a suburb of Washington, D.C. Only 5 months earlier, 10-year-old Rosie Gordon had been bike riding in her neighborhood when she was abducted, raped, and murdered. Her killer had never been found.
Nice to meet you too.
Rosie's mother quickly came to Tammy Brannon's support.
The yellow ribbons that punctuate trees and balconies at the Woodside apartment complex in Lorton have weathered
Once Melissa's
3
disappearance was
snowstorms.
reported
They've
on the
held their
news,
position
the community
fear
rushed to
and
her support.
speculation as to the
Yellow
whereabouts
ribbons
of
began
5-year-old
appearing on
Melissa
Christmas
Brannon.
trees throughout the area.
By all indications, Tammy was a wonderful mother, very loving mother, very, very protective of her child. Melissa was her only child, and I just think all those facts together struck a chord that virtually anyone could identify with those circumstances, and people's hearts went out to the Brannon family.
Hundreds of people volunteered to post flyers throughout the region and assist the local authorities in their search. A new expert was also brought into the search effort. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children sent John Gold, one of their search and rescue consultants.
We are legislated into being as the state clearinghouse for all the information regarding missing persons. And we also assist families and law enforcement, kind of as a liaison between the two, working as many cases as we can.
After debriefing, Gold and his partner went directly to the apartment complex clubhouse.
Check his stride out here.
Outside, they found adult male footprints leading from the furnace room window to a split rail fence whose top rail had recently been broken.
we began to find transferences on the other side of the fence into a small parking lot there beside the clubhouse, in the parking lot, I think, with an abandoned restaurant or some type of building there. And that's where the track stopped.
Straight through here, over this fence.
Right from the beginning, we found the adult footprints, but we never found a child's footprints. So we felt comfortable that if that was the abductor we were looking for, and we felt pretty comfortable that it was, that Melissa was probably being carried even from outside the window, was being carried by the abductor to the point where she and the abductor got in the vehicle.
But where would Hughes have taken her?
I don't know.
Detectives received a lucky break when they interviewed Hughes's wife.
She had been somewhat suspicious that he might go somewhere else after work. She didn't want him to go anywhere except to work and directly back home. And so unbeknownst to him, she had made a note of what the mileage was. And the following day told us that she had checked the mileage again and that 12 miles had been put on the car. We now had another piece of possible information about the extent to which he could have gone that night. We first marked the location of the crime. This was the apartment complex in southern Fairfax County. We next located Caleb Hughes' residence, which was in northern Prince William County, roughly in this area. We then took a string that was the equivalent of 12 linear miles and tied the two ends of the string together and placed them over the pins. So we simply took a pencil and defined that area so that any point at the end of that string represented the outer limits of the search that was conducted on December the 8th.
Within 3 days of Melissa Brannan's disappearance, investigators had organized a 25-square-mile joint search with the Army, Police Department, Civil Air Patrol, and Coast Guard. Over 500 volunteers turned out for the effort.
We have a 12-mile radius that we need to cover.
Black patent leather shoes, the gold bows, and clean fitted jacket.
We had dozens of search teams that were comprised of trained law enforcement people, civilian volunteers, and military personnel. They were doing step-by-step searches of defined areas. Each area had been broken down and was assigned to a team.
We're going to be looking for the clothing a lot. That's going to be one of the main things.
They had specific instructions on how to search. If they found anything which they thought might be evidence, they were to mark it, not to disturb it, and we had teams of crime scene people who would then respond to that particular location and process the evidence. At this point, we've not found anything today that puts us any closer than we were this morning.
The volunteers were frustrated and extremely disappointed.
I know there were nights when I would go home and my family would have seen a newscast about another day of searching, and my own children would say, "Daddy, are you going to find that little girl? When are you going to find that little girl?" And I think that was a conversation that was occurring in the homes of dozens of investigators and police officers involved in this case.
While the search continued, Goguen approached the nearby FBI lab with the evidence he had processed from the car. Because Melissa was still missing, the FBI's state-of-the-art technology would be critical in establishing the connection between the hair, fibers, and bloodstains collected and Melissa Brannan. Agent Doug Diedrich of the FBI's Trace Evidence Unit would examine the evidence. Perhaps he could find a link to Melissa Brannan.
There you have to go to extraordinary measures to try to recreate, if at all possible, the environment of the victim, most recent environment, and also the types of hairs that the victim may have, the type of clothing that the victim may have been wearing the night of the disappearance. And that's the difficult part.
As long as Melissa was still missing, filing charges against Caleb Hughes was all but impossible unless compelling evidence could be found. Diedrich and the lab examiners were impressed by the large number of fibers that had transferred onto the passenger seat of Hughes's car. Fairfax County investigators had identified nearly 70 different fibers.
That included the blue acrylic fibers, the red cotton fibers, the black rabbit hairs, and and there were, I believe, 1 or 2 head hairs in the case. But that's monumental. Sounds like a small number. That's huge.
Once the FBI entered the case, its agents conducted their own investigation of Hughes's house. When Caleb Hughes's name was released as the primary and only suspect in the case, a media frenzy followed.
Hughes has not been charged in the case, but he is the target of round-the-clock surveillance by the FBI. Federal investigators working with police from Fairfax County last night executed a search warrant on the groundskeeper's rented townhouse. They recovered several items which have been taken to the FBI laboratory to be tested to see if there is any evidence linking this man to Melissa. In the meantime, the FBI's official comment is no comment.
The FBI brought the power of a federal grand jury to the investigation. The grand jury ordered Hughes to submit to blood and other forensic tests, something the local authorities had not been able to order. Hughes complained bitterly in interviews that his life had been ruined by the invasion. Details of a troubled past emerged. Hughes grew up in an abusive, dysfunctional home. He had a record as a juvenile delinquent, a long history of drug and alcohol abuse, and a disturbing attraction toward children.
As an adult, he had been convicted of larceny. He had been convicted of car theft. He had been convicted of contributing to delinquency of a minor. The evidence indicated that he did spend a lot of time with young children, nobody the age of Melissa Brannon, but certainly a lot of children in their early teens.
In the lab, FBI examiners had begun analyzing the stains on the soles of Hughes's shoes. Though luminol testing had damaged the samples taken from Hughes's car, they became increasingly convinced that these minute traces contained blood serum proteins that could determine the crucial connection to Melissa.
This blood's been...
The samples were submitted for DNA and serology tests.
Make different slide, for sure.
15 days after Melissa's abduction, a candlelight vigil for Melissa was held at the apartment complex. The little girl's disappearance had united the Fairfax community in compassion and outrage.
And during that whole Christmas season of 1989, that every night on the 6 o'clock news, you saw the video shot that her grandfather had taken of Melissa Brannon. And I'm sure I was like many people in the metropolitan area of Washington who felt that they knew her from seeing this lovely child every night on television.
But shortly after New Year's, a judge in the next county received a letter from Hughes's probation officer informing him that Hughes had violated probation for an auto theft conviction 2 years earlier. On January 24th, the judge revoked Hughes's probation, and he was finally put behind bars. The earliest he could be released was November, giving the Fairfax County prosecutor ample time to build his case. Without sufficient evidence to file charges, Hughes had remained free. But now, with Hughes safely put away, the FBI had the time needed for the extensive testing required by the trace evidence. There was still a chance Melissa's body might be found, but without it, the case against Hughes would have to be made in the FBI lab. Already, FBI examiner Doug Diedrich had found his first big break in the case.
I remembered some black animal hairs in the debris from the front seats of the car. And in looking through the little girl's nightshirt, I noticed these similar black hairs sticking out of the nightshirt. So it just rang a bell. I went back, mounted those up on slides and compared them, and sure enough, dyed rabbit hair, and they matched each other.
The rabbit hairs from Hughes's car and those found on Melissa's nightgown both revealed a distinctive corncob texturing, an exact microscopic match. Agent Diedrich immediately called the prosecutor to determine whether Tammy Brannan owned a rabbit fur coat. Not only was it confirmed that Tammy Brannan owned a rabbit fur coat, she had worn it to the Christmas party. Her mother had bought it in Germany, and it was dyed an extremely rare bluish-black color almost unknown in the United States. Melissa had handled the coat at the party and at home. Diedrich had made the crucial connection between Melissa and the car of Caleb Hughes.
So you not only, you tied those rabbit hairs, you tied that match not only to the fur coat of her mother, you tied it to the front seat of the car, but you also tied it to the child's environment itself, the rabbit hairs on the shirt of the child.
To me, that was a significant point in the case, because then it starts pushing me in the direction of we might have something. And from there, it was a matter of digging some more, see if I couldn't find some additional fibers that may be of value. So I started digging a little bit more, starting looking a little closer, asking questions of myself, asking questions of the evidence, because it's speaking. Strange, but it's speaking to me.
As week after week passed, Melissa's name eventually disappeared from the news. Life in Fairfax County had returned to normal, but Tammy Brannan was still no closer to finding her child.
It's tremendously difficult for the family to come to terms with everything that has gone on, to come to terms with still trying to hold on to that glimmer of hope that their child's alive, and then the realization that in all likelihood, they may never find their child alive or may never find the body of their child even after they've been murdered.
Tammy was forced to face the reality that by now, there was almost no chance Melissa could still be alive.
We wanted to close this case and not just close the case in the sense of identifying and prosecuting a suspect, but we wanted to bring real closure to the case in answering the question, what happened to Melissa Brannan that night? Why did it happen?
Such questions plagued Tammy Brannan. Depressed and unable to work, she remained secluded in her apartment, waiting. Agent Diedrich had examined the blue acrylic and red cotton fibers in the passenger seat evidence collected by Jim Gogan. At first glance, they appeared to match descriptions he had been given of the red tights and big bird sweater Melissa wore that night. But without a duplicate outfit to make an exact fiber comparison, he was at a dead end.
And so I went home, spoke to my wife. Of course, she straightened me out right away that if it had a big bird on it, it wasn't Winnie the Pooh and it had to be sold at JCPenney's, having young kids of my own about the same age.
Diedrich asked his wife if she kept any old JCPenney catalogs in the house from the last few years. She said she knew she had a Christmas catalog.
Teased me about being a pack rat. I think
Diedrich was astonished to find a picture of an outfit that exactly matched the description of that worn by Melissa.
JCPenney's catalog. I collected it 2 years ago at Christmas.
Oh, great.
The FBI contacted JCPenney, and the store began a search of its records. For more than 2 months, Tammy Brannan had anxiously waited by the phone for some kind of information or word about her daughter.
Where is she?
Then, completely unexpectedly, she received a phone call. A man's voice told her he was holding Melissa for ransom and that she must deliver $75,000 the next day or her little girl would be seriously hurt.
Can I talk to her?
Had Melissa been found?
Yes. Yes.
The national statistics will tell you that a child who's abducted by a stranger is usually dead within 3 hours of the abduction. So the likelihood of Melissa being alive months after the abduction is extremely slim.
Mom, they have Melissa.
Tammy immediately called her mother, but Detective Wilden cautioned them not to let their hopes get too high.
No, don't call anyone. I'll tell you all about it. Just come over right now.
Once again, Melissa Brannan was about to become front-page news. Detective Wilden had instructed Tammy Brennan to cooperate with the ransom demands in the hopes her daughter would be recovered alive. As extortion falls under federal guidelines, the FBI coordinated the ransom drop. The FBI SWAT team was ready when two young men showed up in the parking lot to pick up the money.
I see him getting ready to open up the door. Got the bag. Go. Here we go. FBI, freeze!
They were quickly arrested. But did they have Melissa in their possession?
The information provided in the ransom call was so vague and so generalized, it's entirely possible that the person who called may have picked up that information simply by watching the news or reading the newspaper. Usually if there's a ransom demand that is legitimate, they're going to have very specific information that would be known only to the abductor and probably some of the investigators.
The two arrested youths were former students and roommates from a nearby university who had seen an opportunity to make some easy money out of Tammy Brennan's tragedy. They were convicted of 5 counts, including conspiracy and extortion, in the United States District Court in Alexandria, Virginia.
Turned out to be just a terrible hoax. I mean, just terrible. The notion that you would do that deliberately to a mother who was going through what she was going through.
There were copious amounts of dog hairs in the tape samples collected by Fairfax County crime scene investigator Jim Gogan, as well as dozens of human hairs. FBI lab examiners separated and painstakingly subjected each one to testing. Finally, a hair was found that was different from the others. The hair was a very light blonde, the only one of its type found in the vehicle. But it was an exact match with the hairs found in Melissa's hairbrush. Matching the human hair with Melissa was the second big match for Diedrich. But the critical link of Melissa's clothes to the fibers from Hughes's car was incomplete without a duplicate Big Bird outfit to analyze. Because it had been a special Christmas outfit, produced only once, it could not be found in stock. JCPenney gave the FBI a list of people who had purchased the outfit from its catalog division.
They then sent FBI agents out across the country to locate those people and determine if they still had the Big Bird outfit that they had bought from the JCPenney catalog, and ultimately they were able to locate a sample outfit from a family that still had the outfit.
Obtaining the outfit could mean the difference between conviction and acquittal in the case. The FBI asked the family traced through the JCPenney records to send it to their crime lab.
Well, I remember that day pretty clearly. I knew the outfit was coming in. The fiber color, according to the color in the catalog, was navy blue. But the fibers that I was finding were sort of purplish blue. So I was a little anxious that maybe this wasn't the same outfit, that maybe we were going in the wrong direction. So when that package came, I was, again, uncomfortable with even opening it, because I thought I was on the right track, but I didn't want to be wrong. I opened up the box, and sure enough, it had a purplish coloration to it. So it kind of gave me a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling there that I might have the right color anyway.
Fibers were pulled from the red cotton skirt and the blue acrylic sweater. A thorough analysis of the fibers from the outfit indicated an identical match with the fibers from Hughes's car. From the red cotton threads to the blue acrylic yarns to the yellow cross threads from the plaid skirt, the duplicate Big Bird outfit matched in every respect with the car fibers.
What I was finding was meaningful evidence that an abduction had taken place, that in fact the victim, in all likelihood, had been in the front seat of the subject's car.
With the new evidence, the prosecution could now piece together the actions of Caleb Hughes on the night Melissa disappeared. At the party, Hughes had tried to pick up several adult women, but when they rejected him, he sought a substitute, Fueled by frustration and alcohol, Caleb Hughes became a desperate predator with a perverse desire. His stalking eye fell upon the children. He waited and watched until an opportunity presented itself. When it did, Caleb Hughes seized an innocent and trusting child.
Hey, Melissa. Hey. Remember me? Come here.
By abducting Melissa Brannon, Hughes had crossed the boundary into the unspeakable.
We got to like we just catch up with each other. Did it?
The analysis of the duplicate Big Bird outfit produced compelling evidence. It would be a powerful tool in the case against a man who investigators felt was a ruthless child molester and murderer. But Agent Diedrich had to convince the jury how incredibly unlikely it would be that these fibers had come from any source other than Melissa's outfit. He began asking people at the FBI to give him any items they may have made of navy blue acrylic. He collected more than 100.
And the objective was to see, do the fibers that I found on the front seat of Cal Hughes' car, do they match any of these? The answer was no.
From the items, Diedrich collected 126 different acrylic fibers. He made 7,983 comparison tests with those fibers against the ones found in Hughes's car. Out of almost 8,000 tests, only one succeeded in making an exact microscopic match with the blue acrylic fibers found in Hughes's car. And that was the duplicate Big Bird outfit.
Whenever you match two things, it has a lot of significance. These aren't random events. These, in most cases, occur. Is it possible? You can't deny the possibility that it could be a coincidence. But after looking at this stuff for a lot of years, I'm not a big believer in coincidence.
3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, as investigators made final preparations for the case, a stunning development occurred. They received a phone call. 2 counties away, police had just found the body of a child on the median strip of Interstate 95.
I'll be right there.
I called Weldon. We got in his car, and there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that that was going to be it, because Hughes knew that area, spent time down in that area. I said, wow, this is going to be it.
That section of median on I-95 is wide and densely wooded. It would have been easy for Hughes to pull over, hide the body among the thick vegetation, and drive off unnoticed, and there would be little chance of someone finding the remains. But someone found a body. Was it Melissa's? If it was Melissa Brannon's body in the highway median, Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney Robert Horan felt he could put Hughes behind bars on Murder 1 charges. His hopes were high, but they were soon dashed.
As soon as we got there, as soon as I saw it, I knew it wasn't Melissa Brannon, because the skeleton had rings on 3 fingers. But it was a young girl. She's 13, 14-year-old who had been in that media for 2 growing seasons.
The young girl's body was never identified. Finally, nearly 1 year after Melissa's disappearance, Hughes was arrested on a grand jury indictment for abducting Melissa Brannon. He was transferred from the Prince William County Jail to the Fairfax County Jail. Moran had delayed the indictment for several months in the hope that Melissa's body would be found.
By then, I know we were all pretty satisfied that the worst had happened to the child. Unfortunately, under Virginia law, you can charge somebody with murder without the body, but you have to be able to prove where the murder occurred. And of course, without the body in this case, we had no way of proving where it occurred, so we couldn't charge him with murder.
Abduction with intent to defile was the strongest case that could be brought against him. Hughes pleaded not guilty. Few people in Fairfax County believed that Melissa could still be alive, but everyone, most of all Tammy Brannan, needed to know what had happened and needed to see justice served.
Because it's tremendously important that the family of that child had definitive answers, that they know what happened to their child, even if the news is not pleasant. They need to understand exactly with concrete information what happened to their child. They need to be able to have closure. They need to be able to give that child the burial that they deserve and go on with their lives.
With Agent Diedrich's airtight analysis of the trace evidence, Robert Horan went into the trial confident that he could convince the jury beyond reasonable doubt. The trial began on February 26, 1991.
Looking good.
A chief part of Horan's strategy was depicting Hughes' deviant sexual behavior at the party. He produced several female witnesses who recalled the crude, vulgar sexual propositions he had made to them, and others who testified he had spent considerable time playing with Melissa and had been talking to her just before she disappeared. His behavior was even more extreme, trying to eliminate the evidence. Washing his clothes, his leather belt, his shoes. He could not account for the fresh cuts on the soles of his shoes. Nor could he account for his whereabouts for the 2.5 hours between leaving the party and arriving home.
But the problem for the defense is somehow you had to explain that time, and there was never an explanation. I mean, it would have gutted our case. Our case is over if you can explain any of that time.
Though tests for blood on the shoes had proved inconclusive, the prosecution was now able to show the jury the exact matches made between the rabbit hairs, the head hair, and the fibers found in Hughes's car. Nonetheless, the defense argued that all of the fiber and hair evidence was purely circumstantial.
It may be circumstantial, but it is powerful circumstantial evidence because it doesn't change.
In order to obtain the maximum sentence for Hughes, Horan needed to convince the jury that Hughes had intended to defile Melissa once he had her in his car.
And the only way the fibers from her outfit would have been found on the seat is that her coat had been removed while she was in that car.
The prosecution charged that Hughes could only have removed Melissa's coat for one purpose, an attempt to defile.
The true answer is that that 5-year-old was seated against her will in the front seat of that vehicle.
Caleb Hughes's trial lasted 8 days. After 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of abducting Melissa Brannan with intent to defile. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
For the family members, it can't end because of the eternal hope, if you will, that someday this child that's never been seen, never been found, this child someday will appear. And that's hard stuff. That is hard stuff.
Caleb Hughes is still serving his sentence today, and the body of Melissa Brannan has never been found. Eventually, Tammy Brannan moved from the Woodside apartment complex, but she never changed the telephone number that Melissa had memorized by heart, hoping that one day a call might come.